Hi, everyone, and welcome to Emperor Watch Weekly Live. I'm Ileana Chan. I realized that I actually put something on that last graphic, which was wishful thinking.
I know Andrew has been charged. Yeah, not yet.
Yeah, he has not been charged. He's just been arrested. But I have changed the rest of the graphics. It was just, I jumped way ahead to what I was hoping would happen. I'm Ileana Chan, by the way, and my co-host.
You're manifesting. It's okay. Let's manifest.
Let's manifest. Exactly. And hello to our commenters. To John Trudeau, which I think is like 6 a.m. where they are. Amazing early bird. Thank you for joining us again. And of course, Rafael Diaz from Brazil. Thank you for joining us, guys.
Hi, Liana. Hi, everyone. Great news. I think it's a beautiful start of the Chinese New Year. It's promising. It's a promising year. How are you doing, Ileana, with this piece of news?
I know this is the year of the horse, and I wanted to say something about that for you, and then I completely.
Oh, please do. No. I'm all ears.
Now I have to find it, but we'll get back to it. I will find it, but in the meantime, let's go over the news items that we will be covering today, because they are. The Munich Security Conference 2026. We talked about that to Matthew Ho, and that will be coming later. Then, of course, we have Prince Andrew arrested, not charged yet. And so we'll be covering that. And then also China, the green superpower. We're going to contrast that with Trump's new repeal to the EPA, so the Environmental Protection Agency. He repealed very specific regulations there, so we're going to be talking about that. And of course, I put end of the unipolar world. I think I'm trying to manifest things.
Yeah, I wondered when I saw Prince Andrew charged, because I thought Ileana is so specific about things. She's so precise in her language. Why she put charged? But it's great. Let's manifest.
It was just wishful thinking, unfortunately. But we should start with that, right?
Yeah, let's talk about the prince, the pedophiles, and the secrets of the crown. Ileana, let's talk about things that no one is talking about. And my question here is, why did the monarchy hand Andrew Mountbatten over to the British police? This was a handover. Absolutely a handover. He was arrested on his 66th birthday and becomes the first senior member of British royal family to be detained in a long, long time. Well, we had the abdication, I think, as Henry III, because he was flirting with the Nazis, but this is a detention. So I understand this is an institutional risk calculation, carried out at least without resistance from the royal household and with a damage control. But let's get into that, I think, to the facts for our foreign audience. Shortly after 8 o'clock this Thursday, yesterday's 19th of February, 6 unmarked vehicles from Thames Valley Police arrive at Wood Farm, the residence that Andrew Mountbatten, ex-Prince Andrew, Duke of York, I'll call him Duke of Neverland. Duke of Netherlands occupies the royal state of Sandringham in Norfolk. So it was his 66th birthday. Hours later, we saw this picture of a visibly shaking, sweating man. Do you remember Virginia Giuffre saying how he was sweating like he was raining, and she felt utterly disgusted by him? You could see he's sweating on the back seat of a car leaving Ayrsham police station. So this is something, almost a paradigm change. You have in modern history of the United Kingdom, you don't have that. And there is also no precedent that the British police have ever entered royal properties without prior consent with the King's office. So have they really entered without authorization? Who authorized it? According to The Guardian, Charles said, and the palace said, we had no idea, no prior knowledge of this investigation and the police action. And Prince Charles goes say that let's justice take its course. So I think here's very calculation, this distancing and dissociation for Andrew as the circumstances invites. Well, it's too little, too late. And you see the royalists asking for Charles to have his head cut in an attempt to save monarchy. Pass to Williams, we want to maintain this monarchy. But I think what British press is massively suppressing in this coverage. One of the first aspects, they are systematic. The meeting. One of the most crucial aspects of this investigation, Liana. So this detention from Prince Andrew did not result from a prosecutor decision by the Crown Prosecution Service. It did not. The British Public Prosecution's Office has for years refused to act. He was widely criticized to defend the royal family. It resulted from a police action within an ongoing investigation driven by the Republic, the pressure group, the Republic, which is a non-partisan Republic pressure group here in the UK. They have around 9,000 paying members, 140,000 registered supporters, and they filed a criminal complaint with Thames Valley Police. Their lawyers prepared this criminal complaint, and they were preparing a private prosecution with the specialist lawyers should the police not act. Of course, there is the popular pressure, the circumstances, the piling evidence, but the Crown Prosecution Office had the role to delay, and the role not to act. This was extreme pressure. So it's very interesting how the Crown respond over recent months. You know, it's like an exercise of calculated distancing. First, Charles say, well, we're going to remove Andrew from his royal duties and patronage. At the pressure, the heat is turning up. You know, he would remove this, so it would become legally open door for investigations. You know, that would not be possible without if Andrew had prerogatives. And then progressively, we see them detaching themselves from Andrew from the statement. You see the language shifting. Yeah, before Andrew was family member, and now he becomes a matter to be investigated by the authorities. You know, and Charles issued yesterday a personal statement without the usual palace protocol, declaring the law must take its course and offering full-hearted cooperation with the police. You know, so there is no doubt there is a distancing from Andrew as it becomes necessary for maintaining their faces, you know, to save the monarchy. It's a huge crisis, probably an unprecedented crisis of the monarchy. And I think the Republic CEO, Graham Smith, he was very direct in his statement. And I'm going to read, you're going to see using my glasses because I can't see anything anymore. I can't see from far and from close. But look what Graham Smith says. Graham Smith says, there is a reason to quote, there is a reason to believe that in relation to some offenses, the senior members of the royal family may be material witnesses and may also have committed offenses. Charles and William need to speak up and admit what they knew, when they knew it, and why they continue to protect Andrew. I don't know if you've seen a report from the Sunday that Charles paid 12 million pounds hush money for Virginia Giuffre.
Yeah,
so he borrowed that.
I mean, I think that. Oh, sorry, there's some weird.
Yeah,
a weird echo. Do you guys hear an echo?
I can't hear echo. I hear perfectly.
Hearing my own voice is horrifying. But I think like there's several things happening here, and obviously I'm going to do some speculation. Firstly, the Queen's death probably has shifted a lot of the narrative because Prince Andrew was famously her favorite son So there's that sort of aspect to it. I mean, obviously the royal family has always been really deeply protective of their reputation, because their reputation is the only thing really that is allowing, I think, this continual ridiculous power that they have. Because like if you look at how much they own, the British royal family manages 16% of the world's land through the Crown Estate. They personally own, like, the Duchy of Lancaster, which is privately owned by the monarch, comprises of 46,000 acres. I mean, these are leeches on the whole world. A legacy of British colonialism. So there is no reason, to sort of like maybe give some credence to Graham Smith, like position as a republic. There is no real reason why we should be propping up the royal family. It's actually appalling in this day and age when we have rising poverty levels and, societal issues that are very serious. So there is that thing. So therefore, their reputation is as this instrumental British cultural touchstone. It's really important.
They are the genesis of the British Empire. Without the monarchy, there will be no empire. Without the Spanish monarchy, there will be no Spanish empire. Without the Portuguese monarchy, there would be no British empire. They are the genesis of modern imperialism. And the way they protect themselves, I think it's beyond protection. I'm just trying to find the British word for it. 1 second. Go ahead.
Yeah, and certainly as like the world has somewhat changed from colonialism to imperialism and more covert actions, the royal family's influence has diminished, but it's still within that imperial structure, right? But the thing here, I think, is that Prince Andrew, ever since I was a child, has had a terrible reputation. Same with Fergie. Like, I was born here in the UK, and I'm significantly older than I look. So throughout my entire childhood, Prince Andrew and Fergie, they were scandalous. And that sort of reputation, I think, was shameful for the monarchy. The death of Princess Diana, of course, like, somewhat transformed a lot of maybe the enduring myth of royalty, because she was such a beautiful, tragic figure, and that kind of, they were able to spin that into something where maybe people defended the monarchy more rather than question why it should still exist. But one of the other things too is, like, with Prince Andrew being stripped of his title, a lot of these revelations about Epstein came up. So, years ago, right? They already came up years ago. Remember when he said he didn't sweat? He has a genetic with the Virginia
Jeffrey.
her allegations about the sweating. He was like, I genetically can't sweat. He gave an interview about that. So it's been kind of deeply embarrassing for the monarchy for a while. Now with the death of the Queen. Another thing too was this insinuation that perhaps the terrible press about Meghan and Harry, which was so overblown, like, it was constant. People just absolutely were talking about them all the time, could have covered a little bit, because that was so controversial, even though it was really a nothing burger compared to the allegations against Prince Andrew.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous how much coverage, right? Like,
yeah,
it's like, yes, maybe you don't like Meghan, maybe you don't like Harry, but that's not the same as the things that Prince Andrew are being accused of. But granted, back to this idea of him being arrested, he wasn't arrested for the actual.
He was not for the sexual. Yeah. So I think the most telling thing is that this was not an initiative of the British Public Crown Prosecution Office. That is absolutely telling how the institutions bulletproof the royal family. The royal family in Britain, it's not what you think. It's not Disneyland. It's not like the foreign audience. It's not ornamental. It's power structuring over an entire nation, in a nation that had colonized the world over. They are the genesis. They are the largest human traffickers of world history. This is the royal family. Look what they did in Africa. Look what they did everywhere they stepped in. Look how they hungered India, how they partitioned India. There's these are the genesis of inequality of the British imperialist power. They were the one sponsoring those imperialist ventures. It's the amalgamation of private capital and historically and the royal families. And because they are absolutely legally shielded, politically protected, they have immunity and insulation on everything. It's so much a structure that if you look at British property law, is still a feudalistic system. The whole Western world has a property law, and which is completely different. It's based on a completely set of rules. In the UK, we still have a absolutely feudalistic property law. That means protects the property and F all the rest. You have no rights if you don't own anything in the UK. That's the reality. It's extreme. The legal system in the UK is archaic. Let alone, let's say Charles is the head of the British courts. The brother of the king maybe will face a court which his brother is the head of the court. How disturbing is this? And now I want to talk, Ileana, what did the crown knew? Because the crown handed Andrew over. Why did they do it? In the United Kingdom, regular access to royal residence is tightly controlled and is subject to what we call a vetting process, security clearance, in other words. So this is conducted by MI5 at the very least, in coordination with the Metropolitan Police, Special Protection Department, not any department. Yeah, the highest level they call developed vetting. It's mandatory for anyone to access top secret classified material, and for anyone it's equal, top material, top secret, and to regularly move through the residence in close proximity to the members of the royal family. So it means if you get close to a royal family, you have to go through a clearance process within British FBI at the highest level. Now, Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, they walked free through Windsor Castle, Royal Lodges of Sandringham, Balmoral, for decades. We're talking about a 3 decades friendship. So the logic of the British security apparatus is unforgiving. None of those visits would have been possible without complete intelligence dossiers on both individuals. It would be impossible. And these dossiers, they are necessarily fed into the royals' family security briefings. So Queen Elizabeth herself, she received Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine's father, the British intelligence, very close ties to Israeli Mossad, if not Mossad himself. So you're going to say that Epstein network was not part of the Crown institution circle? Impossible. Impossible. And Ileana, you bring something, you brought several times the UK-US agreement, which is the Five Eyes agreement, where we call. So to this dimension, to the British dimension of clearing, we have the intelligence sharing architecture of the UK-US agreement, which is a multilateral treaty signed after the Second World War, which we know as Five Eyes, actually Six Eyes. It involves intelligence sharing between the agencies of United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, USA, informally Israel, in a network across their secret service. So you're going to tell me the American investigation to Epstein, including the material from FBI, DOJ, and CIA, did not circulate through that network? The United Kingdom had to have access, and so did the British Crown. So any claims to the contrary is absolutely in the realm of fantasy and insult to our intelligence. I'll tell you more. The Foreign Office knew it all. Let's remember Andrew, Prince Andrew. He was a special envoyeur, whatever this French word's pronounced in English, envoyeur. So
envoy? Is it envoy?
Envoy. Okay, thank you, Ileana. Yeah, he was UK's special representative for trade and investment between 2001 and 2011. So you're going to tell me the Home Office knew nothing? The Foreign Office knew nothing?
I think that's the thing, is that the Epstein files and all the evidence we have of, like you're saying, Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell being buddies, as you can say, of the royal family, like spending time in Balmoral or whatever, all these estates. And it really lays to rest that myth that the crown, that the royal family is separate from the government and like in theory,
exactly. There's a myth.
presentation. Yeah, there's a presentation that they are more like their power has been completely neutralized. They're actually neutral. They actually have no power and influence in the structure, but it's just more like a covert influence now. Now it's being laid bare for everyone to see that it's always been there.
An absolute influence. They have access to everything and anything. They have total immunity. They are head of all institutions, are insulating the royal family without a exception. Look, Ileana, when I was a lawyer to the government, you could say the level of reverence you need to have towards it's unquestionable. You can question anything into levels, but the British royal family is something you never manifest to be against with. Otherwise, you sacked. They will persecute you inside. So it's ridiculous. Coming from a republic is so ridiculous, their level of reference. So, there's a lot to unpack here, but two things the British press is not saying. The first, it was an effort of a crown persecution surface. It was not, they had the duty to act. They haven't acted for all these years. It's a pressure group putting with lawyers an investigation that triggered this. There are 9 investigations now going on him, as we say, yeah. But it took a pressure group, because the crown persecution office, how the crown is going to persecute a member of the royal family is a crown persecution office. They hold the entire system.
Also the photos that were released were extremely damning. I don't think they needed to respond in some way, right? They can't just, because those photos were very shocking, I think, to see.
Yeah. So I think what the British media is avoiding asking is precisely this. If the vetting system works, and if Five Eyes shares what it shares, the British royal family necessarily had access over many years to information about Epstein, far more than we can possibly think, far more than is any Epstein files. They have decades of recorded information on this network. They probably one of the institutions that know the very most about Epstein, his connections, and he was walking free through the royal lodges. Andrew's arrest is very convenient for the crown, if not necessary, insofar it closes the door to what leads to the question of their true extent, the true extent of the royal family's member knowledge and involvement in this network. That's why he was handed over to the police. And another thing, like as a lawyer there, I think it's very shocking, is the charges that you mentioned that this detention erases with it. So the potential suspicions, not charges, the suspicions, the choice of suspicions invites scrutiny in its own right. So Andrew was detained for misconduct in public office. It's a common law offense. It's not written in any code, technically difficult to prove. It requires demonstration that he acted in his capacity as public official. And he, as you say, he was not detained for sexual assault, rape of a vulnerable person, or sexual exploitation of minors. The offenses, the very offenses for which Virginia Giuffre accused him of having abused her. Since she was 70 years old, she said, I was abused by Andrew in London, in New York, in Epstein's private island, in the Caribbean. This heroine died in 2025. how much courage it takes to denounce a royal family, to denounce a man that has the whole world elite like Epstein. I mean, my heart breaks to know that this woman is now under the earth after all she has suffered, and we know the civil case brought against Andrew was settled in 2022 for 12 millions. It's much more than he pays to Fergie in the divorce settlement. Do you honestly think that the British Royal they will pay multi-million pound settlements on the basis of the speculation? They knew it all at the very, they knew the details. Charles knew the details. And what the Epstein files reveal that Andrew, so in this case, what he has been specifically charged, is specifically under suspicion, is very interesting that you have only a common law offense. I'll tell you why. So what the files reveals that Andrew, in his role as this UK special envoy, is it correct? Trade and investment, or in a decade's time. He was leaking sensitive and confidential information of the British government on several occasions, apparently in exchange for personal financial benefits to Epstein. I will have to read one of the most notorious instances that occurred on Christmas Eve. He was trying to sell Afghanistan on Christmas Eve. That's so political. Look, it's so political. It's nothing. It can be reduced as a sexual scandal. Look what Andrew wrote to Epstein on Christmas, one day before Christmas, 24th of December. Attached is a confidential briefing produced by the Provincial Reconstruction Team in Helmand for international investment opportunities. I'll be offering this in other places in my network, including Abu Dhabi, but would be very interested in your comments, the thoughts or ideas as to who else could usefully show this in order to attract some interest. I have unfortunately already found that the Gates Foundation does nothing in Afghanistan. Ileana Helmand was at that moment one of the deadliest provinces of the Afghanistan. And he is selling misery and looking for business opportunity and sending this to a convicted sexual
what
offender.
was he selling exactly?
Yeah. The Helmand briefing is not an isolated accident. We've seen in the Epstein files that Epstein, he had a systematic pattern. He would go where there are collapsed status, looted assets, and he would turn this into business opportunity. Yeah, he was actively mapping opportunities of looted assets in war zones. We have, for instance, an example now involves only Epstein. In July, I think it was 2011, when NATO was bombing Libya, Gaddafi was fleeing. An associate of Epstein, which we don't know who that is, actually, was writing to Epstein detailing how to access $8 billion in international frozen Libyan funds. He was saying, well, look at this $8 billion fund. Is stolen and diverted? And he was enlisting former British MI6 agents and Israeli Mossad. So Andrew here is offering himself as a gateway to the same type of operations in Afghanistan. Let's go to war zone. Let's go to a place that is nobody's land, and let's create a business. And I'm going to use all my, there was one point that Andrew said to Epstein, I have Britain in my pocket. And then I ask you, Andrew, why he's not suspected of the most obvious criminal statute for leaking confidential documents, the Official Secrets Act? I, as a no one, as a cockroach, I was investigated. On that, of course, I was cleared. It's a brutal law. And so, you could say, well, the police were steering the most viable path. No. You can alternatively issue this path. Why he's not being charged, at least while we don't have any knowledge that he is under suspicion of the Official Secrets Act, because probably Ileana will have to disclose material classified documents in court. And this paradox may help him. And not only him, and perhaps not only him.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the way that they're dealing with the Mendelssohn situation, right? Like, why are they singling out one particular person? I mean, it's a scapegoat. I also do think they're guilty, but
no, they are guilty, but they are not the only ones who had to be investigated. We need to investigate people in the British government. Lot of people in the British government. We need a parliamentary inquiry investigating everyone.
Yeah. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create this bad apple situation.
Exactly.
But the fact is, the bad apple spoils the whole barrel. So it's the whole barrel that we need to investigate. But the whole rhetoric is like, what? It's just one bad apple, and that's kind of the way that the media is kind of doing this, right? There's one or two bad apples, and we're just going to ignore the rest of it. And I mean, King Charles, by sort of, like you're saying, giving access to Prince Andrew, perpetuates that. It allows them to say, it's not us, it's this bad apple, he's been bad the whole time. Like I said, even in my childhood, there was all this talk about how terrible Prince Andrew is. And so it's like a useful thing for them to do to distance themselves. And I think the worry is it will work, right? The worry is that it will work.
Yeah, I think so. I think royalists are already trying to get a way out of it, saying Charles needs to abdicate and William needs to step in, modernize. I don't know what they call modernize. It's their language, modernize the monarchy. There's no modernity for modern world means no monarchy.
Well,
world means no monarchy. There's no way to modernize something old.
Well, when they say modernize, they just mean that Kate will wear something from Zara, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Amazing. Exactly. Yeah. So to give a nice face, to say everyone else, you see the royalists say everyone else behave properly, but Charles, no. Charles was never loved among the royalists. In the royalist perspective, Charles was the man who mistreated Diana over Camilla. I'm talking about their perspective. He's this man who's a bit more intellectualized. They don't like that. He likes nature. He's an environmentalist whatsoever. And the queen always marginalized him at some point. So the royalists were always very keen to remove Charles. So they will choose who, they will seize this. I think we need to be careful because they will seize this moment to say Charles needs to be removed, and then William comes in and gives this new face to the monarchy. No, we need a proper inquiry, a proper investigation, and what went in the extensive amount of knowledge of government officials.
I mean, yes, I also don't mind
members of the royal family who, as Graham Smith said, he's heavily involved in the investigation. They might have also committed crimes. While we're talking, I want to show you a picture which is horrific. But you go ahead.
Yes, I agree with you that it needs to be the whole barrel. As our commenters are saying, it seems that there are no not bad apples. It's a whole compass heap of bad apples.
Power structure is a power structure.
Yes, exactly.
A racist one, a deeply, deeply racist one, that where the brown people are, where that don't look like us, we dehumanize them and we traffic them, we rape them, we torture them, and Andrew is actually just living up a psyche that is very ingrained in the whole system.
Yeah, it's still a feudal system.
Yeah, absolutely. God, so, where is this? Well, I'm not finding something. Maybe I shouldn't. Also, it's a picture of Andrew with a plastic breast playing the royal residences with a child.
Oh, God.
Know who that child is. It's so horrific. But let me show you something from this has been going on for 2 weeks. I think this is 2 weeks old interview, but it's just so telling. Look, this is former alleged girlfriend from Andrew, and she's a royal herself. Look what she has to say. Lady Victoria Harvey, ex-girlfriend of Prince Andrew. This is from Afshin Ratazani, amazing journalist. In case you guys want to follow him, he is a amazing appel on the journalist. Look what she's saying.
But I don't know if we should play it because we're gonna get
very powerful. Like if you were on the scene and you were powerful, like to be honest, like if you're not in those files, it would be an insult because it just means that you were a bit of a loser.
Right. So the people who aren't in the files are losers.
Yes.
Okay. Are you in the files?
Well, of course I am, because it's any journalist that wrote about it.
That's an astonishing attitude, isn't it? You're the loser because you're not in this. I find that jaw-dropping.
He knew everybody.
This is the attitude. And Victoria Harvey is going on shows to saying this is a conspiracy of Israel against the monarchy, as if they weren't one and the same, as if they had no connections. It's impossible to talk about Epstein dissociated from Zionism. It's impossible. It's an impossibility.
It's impossible to talk about the UK or the US dissociated from Zionism. You know, it's absolutely integral to both, and the overall imperial structure, as we've talked about.
So Ileana, it's an insult not to be in the Epstein files. You know, like,
I mean, it is an insult for them. It makes sense.
Business as usual. Business as usual. What they do with those women.
Well, it's like what we said. It's what it does is it shows the sausage making part of imperialist structure. Now, whether or not Epstein is like the mastermind, I don't know. I think he's like, there's a lot of different things to say. He's opportunistic and he's deeply evil, but like there's all these other levels, you know, but he was definitely a useful tool within that overall infrastructure. Otherwise he wouldn't be used by all these different entities. So I think she is right in that if you're somebody who's somebody, you would be in those files. That's why you had like the Dalai Lama, Peter Tia, like, you know, we have all these like thought leaders, supposed thought leaders in those files too, because it's just proximity to power, isn't it? It's like that is where the power is. These depraved billionaires, they are all linked into the same system.
Yeah, but her argument is also a bit apolitical, that everyone who's in power is corrupt. Guess what? Maduro is not in this file. Lula is not in this file. Xi Jinping is not in this file. You have world leaders, decent world leaders not in this file.
Structure. They're not part. They are the ones that these imperialists are trying to get rid of. You know, they're trying to like. I mean, they would try to court you if they thought you could be useful, like Putin, like how they tried, like Epstein tried to meet Putin several times and failed. But the idea is to get to you, to get their claws into you and to control you via whatever mechanism, which is the unsavory part, like the sensationalist part, right? They want to control you because of how they see you as like useful for their continuing growth and power. So anyone that's not in it, they're usually the enemies of them. So it's like, to your point.
Yeah, but she wants to, she normalizes everything. And I think
is one of those people. Like, so I'm not saying she's right. I think she's a despicable human being. But what she's showing is that the entire infrastructure is like that. That's why these people like Katie Couric, Chelsea Handler, like Noam Chomsky, like they were okay with meeting with Epstein after 2008. And that is insane. Who would do that? But it's because they want power. They want access to money. They want access to the billionaires. They want access to contracts. They want access to whatever, you know, club this is.
It's
all about network. And that is why she's saying that. Like, she's like another one of these people. They're so shameless. They have no moral compass. So they have no compunction to say just out loud what they're all thinking. But she's correct. If there's someone who's someone in the imperial global north, you will know these people because that's how you get your power. That's how you get access. It's access, right? It's disgusting.
Yeah, I think it's the way she portrays it is so good for the far right, because she's saying, look, everyone who has power will engage with this. Everyone who's occupying a position of power will be corrupt.
Yeah,
And
that's where you have to differentiate. That's where you really have to differentiate.
Yeah.
It's not everyone with power in the whole world. It's
Jeremy
clearly-
Corbyn is not in the files.
It's
you know?
everyone who is part of that imperial structure that are specifically their agenda. It's like, it's going to be Zionism for sure. It's going to be like U.S. imperialism. It's going to be all these exact same things of expansion of capital, etc. That all those people are going to be in those files. Anyone who they see as an enemy, they either try to co-opt you, right, through who knows, blackmail or whatever, or they try to destroy you. So, Jeremy Corbyn would be a person that I would assume they want to destroy if they can't get to him. And Putin and, Xi Jinping, they probably didn't even try.
They're too afraid.
It's possible.
They're
And
too
the
afraid.
And
Yeah,
the
but I think it's so detrimental for politics, because if we say everyone, she's saying, well, this is normal. If you have power, this is normal. So this is the typical far right argument. Politics is shit. Every politician is.
That's why we have to differentiate.
scumbag.
We really have to differentiate, and we have to explain the structures, because it is a real, it's not just a conspiracy theory to say there is an infrastructure of imperialism. There is, through many different entities. We've talked about digital sovereignty, Meta, those types of huge open AI, Palantir. There are specific entities like corporations within that structure that also uphold an imperial agenda, right? So it's not just like anybody who has money, anyone who has power. It's within the network and infrastructure of that system. And I'm certainly not saying with that anyone else outside of that is perfect. No. But we need to, when someone like her says, oh, everybody was blah, 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 she's specifically talking about that worldview where people just think capitalism is the only way, global north is the only way. Those people really think that the world
It's them. The world begins and ends with them.
Yeah, they really think that. And so for them, she's correct that anybody in that world, sure, in that. But that means we have to get rid of them all. And that's why we are anti-imperialists, precisely. To get rid, you need to expose these people and show how it works and get rid of this crazy idea that we have moral authority, that we're the ones that are holding up principles in the world. We're not. Not these people, and that's how they get everyone, right? They kind of suggest that if they do something bad, everyone does it.
Everyone does. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, kill. Who hasn't killed anyone? Who hasn't tortured? Ileana, have you never raped a woman? Have you never trafficked a woman in your life?
Insane.
Oh God, this is an insult. You don't know. You don't know Epstein. You don't know those people. Ileana, really? What are you doing in your social life?
I'm literally a nobody, so that's fair.
Yeah.
But it's so disgusting, that people really, I think the defense of Chomsky is just a similar thing to that. It's it is not excusable. It is not excusable. And to be like, oh, no, no, that is ridiculous.
Ileana, he was making a career rubbing shoulders with Epstein and Stephen Bannon, Cambridge Analytica, who was a friend of the Bolsonaro's family. We saw in the Epstein files, Epstein and Bannon talking about Bolsonaro, pretending he did not know Bannon. It might be better for him this way. We have the documentary of Channel 4 in Cambridge Analytica, where that CEO, Alex, I forgot the name right now, whoever his name is, the one of the pervert clubs as well, let's say member 0003 of the perversion club of Cambridge Analytica. He was saying, well, 2018, we're going to go to Brazil. We're going to interfere in the Brazilian elections. And interfere they did. So why is Chomsky meeting with Bannon? He's so naive. As you said, he was the guy that in his work, he was talking about this power structure. So he was unable to see what he has been he profit from those relationships. How?
Absolutely.
And he didn't had any moral problems in rubbing shoulder with these people, which I think is so shocking.
Yeah, exactly. And it shows, I think it shows in his analysis. That's why you can't really, it's like the Woody Allen stuff, you know, you can't separate the art from the artist when the art mirrors the art.
Yeah. Yeah. When they mirror each other, where is the difference? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, if we're done with that topic, which is a horrible topic, but we've done.
I think what we need to be saying is that we need to abolish. Britain needs to abolish monarchy, and this is the conversation they are trying to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in that mission, you know, because the monarchy, like we're saying with the land ownership, you know, it's more than just the fact that they're this royal family, whatever. They literally they own like hundreds of thousands of acres of land, and we should have a more equitable society. Like we really should. So they're
He's
the
king in
one.
Canada. He's the king in Australia. They have the whole Commonwealth is a form of neo-colonialism and imperialism. You know,
I mean, the question is like,
unfathomable.
Can those people? Would it be easier, do you think, like completely speculative? Do you think it would be easier for Canada or for another Commonwealth country to get rid of this, you know, before we do? Because here in the UK...
Yeah, it could be, right? I think it should be like the French, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think you can talk democracy with a royal family sitting above the law. No. They don't have a register. Look, as a civil servant, if you get a £50 present, you have a register you have to put on it. You get investigated taxes. They don't have anything. They don't register anything, any transactions. They don't pay taxes. They are parasites.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And this history of, they bring a lot of money with tourism. This is a tale they want you to believe. The damage, the social damage that they cause. You know, if you see how the government works, completely subservient to the crown.
You're telling me that if we got rid of the royal family, nobody would bother to come to the UK, considering like we have all the history that people want to see. Like they're coming here just for the royal family. Like
yeah.
No, that's
like Meghan Markle in front of Buckingham Palace. Dreaming.
Yeah, no one's living there now, so let's not bother to visit it. Like what?
Yeah. You can well, let's do the royal family tour probably in a prison jail, in a jail cell next.
Oh my God, you're gonna get us canceled.
The Crown Prosecution Service.
The Royal Courts of Justice. I mean,
and what you said is absolutely right. You cannot say this is a modern. It's no longer an absolutist monarchy. They are within the democratic system. They have no influence. The state is one thing and the government is another thing. This is a huge tale, and you can see everywhere that how they are structurally together, entangled, undissociated. They can't be dissociated in the UK.
Yeah. And it's not even logical, because once people have power and money, they always seek influence. Like, you know, they need influence to maintain that. So I think it's completely irrational already. But having gotten that terrible subject out of the way, I think we're in agreement on that one. We have some more positive news. Positive and negative at the same time. Of course, we can't just have positive, but I'll start with the negative. Okay, so let's go with President Trump has, and this is actually a little bit more than a week old, but it's relevant anyway. So President Trump and the EPA Zeldin deliver single largest deregulatory action in U.S. history. So they're doing, they write this. So this is from the United States government official website. So of course, this is a very positive spin on what they've done. But essentially it says alongside President Trump, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lee Zeldin announced the single largest deregulatory action in U.S. history. And they're, of course, spinning this as a good thing. In this final rule, EPA is saving American taxpayers over $1.3 trillion, eliminating both the Obama-era 2009 gas endangerment findings and all subsequent federal emission standards. So this is basically the 2000 greenhouse gas endangerment findings is the scientific finding that they found that greenhouse gases would endanger populations. This is quite obvious, right? Even if you don't believe in global warming, say, it is obvious that if there is pollution, it would affect you. If there is pollution in the air, it would affect you, right? That is, you don't even have to believe. You can be oh, climate is a hoax, but you can still understand that if there is unfettered greenhouse gases or gases in your face, it would affect your daily life. But of course, no, I mean, not the way that they're doing it. But I just want to point out here that the reason why
it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable how they're spinning this, but go ahead.
Yeah, and the reason why they're spinning it this way, because is, of course, this health rollback will likely hit the poor minority areas hardest. So this article from The Independent, sometimes they get it right, in a stretch of Louisiana with about 170 fossil fuel and petrochemical plants, premature death is a fact of life for people living nearby. There is so polluted and the cancer rate so high, it is known as Cancer Alley.
Wow.
Yeah. A Cancer Alley is one of, and it says here, most adults in the area are attending 2 to 3 funerals per month. But because it's a majority Black community, they don't really care that much, as long as the base, which is apparently white, I guess it's, the funny thing about his base is it's not necessarily just white upper class people, but I think as long as there's this perception that the white middle class or white upper class are not going to be affected, they can really just sort of avoid dealing with it. So
this is what political theory calls environmental racism.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not a specific theory, but it's look, it's a way. It's also what it's being coined as necropolicies, policies that let people die. Let them die. They're Black, they're poor. If they die, it's a necro policy.
And also there's no media coverage. So I think the average person doesn't even really know. I mean, there is this article, but I mean, this is one in...
Yeah, and I would even dare a more harsh term. I would say it's the so-called environmental fascism, when it's linked to a necro policy so explicit as this one. This is Nazi party ideology. They promoted in German what they call Blut und Boden, blood and soil, and it's the nature is for the white people, I think we know that climate change will affect the poorest because it will affect the most vulnerable children, poor people, and add to that these people in America will not have medical access because it's privatized. These people will only go, if they start having pains, they will only go to a hospital when this pain controls the whole body because they will be afraid of the medical bills. This is a necro-Nazi. I would say it's a necro policy. I would say it's beyond racism. I think it's a deliberate policy against the poor, against the minorities. And I have no problem in saying this is a type of fascism associated with necro policies.
Yeah, and I mean, it is really where capitalism gets to the nth degree, where they really do not care about the price to the population, anything for this like deregulation thing. The thing that they're emphasizing is how much money it will supposedly save the American people, which is complete bullshit. It's about the corporations that are going to be getting away with it. They're going to be making more money, and that's essentially all they care about. I think what's interesting about this is that obviously this particular Environmental Protection Agency rollback was officialized on the 12th of February. But now, we have reports coming out this week where actually they're finally I'm hesitant to say it, but they're finally kind of saying that China, we even have this, like, for example, mainstream media now is even sort of admitting, I'm going to put this one up, as Trump retreats from climate goals, China is becoming a green superpower. Now, obviously, this is not new. Like, China's been working on this for like a few decades now. I mean, I actually want to show something because, again, to sort of illustrate the difference between the US and China, it's not about, just China because I'm pro-China and I just love China so much, right? It's literally the systems that are different. What we have to sort of put this in context of is that China won its People's Revolution in 1949. So whatever you think about, like, a lot of people might not understand what that means, but essentially just on a basic level, a cultural basic level, it means that the people of China have much higher expectations for the country actually adapting to their needs, because they already won this revolution. You know what I'm saying? So it's like when I was living in Beijing a few decades ago, or 2 decades ago, this on the left would be what Beijing was like. The pollution was horrific, right? And this is like, I think in the last few years, this is not even the most recent, this is not the most recent picture by any means. Now, when I went back to Beijing, there were blue skies, which really, when I was living there was not blue skies. And so my point being, like, because the thing with China is that the people were affected directly by the pollution, and the government felt they had no choice but to adapt to what the people needed. And they actually made these differences. So now we're seeing that, like, 2 decades on, a huge shift. Yes, they do still have pollution problems. They still have, they are still working on getting rid of, like, the coal dependency. As a Carbon Brief actually talked about, they are actually at the record lowest. Here, I'm going to show you this. China's clean energy pushes coal to a record low for 53% share of power in May 2024. That's still 53% on coal energy. So they still have a long way to go. But the fact that now this year they're sort of analyzing that China may actually have reached peak carbon emissions, because it's now flatlined and started to go down. So that means that despite the rising demand, because of the renewables, the investment in renewables, that we're actually looking at emissions falling in China. So, even though right now they have like a huge percentage still on coal energy, they're moving, you can see the projection towards moving towards renewables, and essentially they're leading the way in terms of the emissions falling. So we're seeing, like, I think, an exciting moment in time where we're actually seeing, all right, so the next few years, we could be seeing a genuine decrease as they're working more and more on renewables. I mean, and they have like different, they have different initiatives. Like, for example, there was this wind turbine. I don't know if you saw that, and maybe I can show it.
No, I did not. I think it's, one of the main lines of attack against China is like China is growing economically, but is polluting the whole world. And it's actually, we are seeing the opposite trajectory of things, that you have economic growth that benefits people and that preserves nature. Look, what you're saying about deregulation is the business as usual in the UK as well. I know it. I have
exactly, and part of it.
I have worked in the environmental ministry in the UK. So the amount of pressure coming even from ministers to deregulate is massive. Sometimes you don't know, am I working for the environment ministry or am I working for the industry ministry? Because they lobby so extensively. I'm not saying there are not environmental concerns, there are not groups, environmental groups, and I mean the body of technicians, they made a huge effort to create legislation to protect the environment. So you have people there, scientists, who are fighting this fight against deregulation, but they are often very overwhelmed with the level of pressure to deregulate, and the Tories did an amazing job in deregulating. Summer does an amazing job as well.
Yeah, exactly. So part of the issue too is because we're in this Cold War essentially against China, right? The imperialists against China. Especially Trump is making this very explicit. He does not want the US really to be investing in green energy because it's quite obvious that China is way ahead in that regard.
Yeah, Brazil has 80% of renewable energy.
Yeah, they're actually responsible for, around 80%, 70 to 80% of the renewable energy in the world. And the US is just not interested in doing a productive economy. So they cannot compete on that level with China. So instead, they're trying to sabotage China's not monopoly, but dominance in that in that industry by saying it's like a hoax, that we don't need it, and hence the rollback of this EPA regulations will allow, for example, cheaper cars, not EV cars, which is really the future.
Yeah, so they have the state completely hijacked by corporations, so they don't have any planning, they don't have any redistribution of wealth or state control on anything. They have been hijacked. And so how they're going to implement a policy that harmonizes economic growth with environmental protection, it doesn't fit their system. So they have to do what they have to do. They have to say the oaks, it's not necessary. The only thing they see in their minimal horizon to compete with China is to deregulate anything, to produce shitloads of things in their minds. They don't understand the perspective of having a socialist constitution, a socialist political power where you may invest in things that you don't get an immediate money value for it. Because it takes
that's not your primary goal. Your primary goal is not the immediate profit. Even the profit margin doesn't have to be as big in China. Like, they have different measures of success. But to your point, exactly, the centralized planning of the China makes it very different. So, for example, this Chinese Central Economic Work Conference, which happened in December of 2025. I just wanted to show this, that one of the key tasks of current economic work, that's what Xi Jinping is calling it. This basically the Communist Party of China is calling this. And one of the key parts, if we go down to number 6, they have very specific things that they're working on in China, but number 6 is specifically about.
Oh, can you read that? Go back. You read for us your Chinese. Show off.
No,
I love that.
But here we have adhere to the dual carbon guidance and promote comprehensive green transformation. Mm-hmm. So it's very specific. If this is in their current economic work, and like I said, there's not that many. They have set 8. They have 8 things that they're working on, right? And like you said, central government, central planning. And one of the things is the comprehensive green transformation. Coordinate to promote carbon reduction, pollution reduction, green expansion and growth, and enhance the momentum of green development. And you can read the rest, here. But, they're very specifically thinking about how to address the carbon issue. So I really do think we're going to check back in a year or so, or like 5 years, and we'll definitely see the emissions fall further, and also the dependence on coal, which is, like we said, now it's like 50 something percent. But I very much imagine it will be going down. And like, it's so important for this, even beyond just what's happening in China. It's so important for sovereignty to have energy sovereignty, because like, look at Cuba, for example. As we discussed already on this show, Cuba has been getting solar panels from China. There's been pretty extensive solar parks being established there, but it needs to be faster, because you see what happens when the US comes in and tries to cut you off from the rest of the world in terms of oil supply. It's like the consequences are absolutely dire. So this shift towards, and that's the other reason why Trump would be trying to say it's a hoax, and I think trying to like tariff or sanction the green energy sector, or at least remove any sort of incentives towards investing in it, is precisely because if we can keep everyone dependent on oil, and the US is supposedly or attempting to control that oil supply.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you touched such an incredible point there. It's when he's talking the masses into a hoax, he's actually protecting a market, and a market that is very profitable, where he shake hands with dictatorships in the Middle East. It's well, what else can I say? It's part of their power structure to keep things as they are, in particularly the oil industry. Yeah, I think you touched the point. So that makes the environment so illustrative of how this power works. It's just environment. No, it's very illustrative of the power.
Right.
It shows,
exactly.
As you touch now in a brilliant way, he is shaking hands with dictatorships in the Middle East to perpetuate a system of human exploitation, of wars, of deprivation. He seems very innocent when he says a hoax. Trump is never innocent. Trump, he portrays things in a very populistic way. He's extremely charismatic. When Trump is talking, you want to hear him talk.
If only to have a laugh, but yeah.
Yeah, he has these expressions of authenticities. You call expressions of authenticities. I talk to power, and I am like very popular. This is populism of the modern of the contemporary times. But what he's hiding here is perverse, as you say.
Yeah, this is okay. So this is interesting. At Atel, hi again. Thank you for joining us again. I do recognize your name. The comment here is all economies are centrally planned. In the USA, Wall Street centrally plans the US economy. So I kind of want to address that, because yes, I think this is slightly a slightly farcical comment, maybe just showing that capitalism is centrally planning the US economy, or like these corporations. But we're actually going to go into an interview with Matthew Ho. And what is interesting about that interview is the way in which he explains how the US economy is really shaped, via the capitalist system, which is essentially almost like a kind of like a pyramid scheme, because it's very, very dependent on financialization, on debt, on speculation, and it's not actually based on anything productive economy. So how does that actually reveal and expose the weaknesses of even their most proud sector, the military?
The most proud sector, absolutely. Yeah.
It's the only thing that they can claim dominance on. But as this conversation with Matthew Ho proves, actually, is that even that one is smoke and mirrors. And there is actually, it's a very interesting conversation that we had, because he just really takes apart a lot of the myths of this invincible army, invincible military, and positions that, back down to earth. So we're going to get into that.
Oh,
But
can I make a confession? I've confessed so many shit already to you, but let me confess to everyone. I am very hooked on American crime, real crime series. And guess what? I would say at least 60% of the crimes involves military people. Military people who engage with us, who, like is the proud wife of a military man who comes home and beats her death and shoot the children. And, so the level of internal violence that this army produces, internal violence as well, produce elements of people who see the whole world as a war. And when you see the world just as a war, or if this is your whole explanation to the world and to relationships, you actually in a delirium.
Yeah.
So there is a level of delirium, a delirium in this society about the military. I think it's a psychiatric disease how they worship the military.
I mean, oh, sorry. Also, the way that they can pretty much commit crimes all over the world, because once you're in military bases, and there's no consequences to that. Like, really,
I come home, I have a private arsenal in my home. Well, how am I gonna kill Jenny? Well, will I take the caliber 38? No, I'm gonna get the Kalashnikov. Well, I'm not sure. Let me try them first. Well, the pink one or the blue one? What matches better my uniform? Which of the guns I'm gonna take? Oh, let me teach my 3-year-old son to shoot. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Johnny, you are an amazing shooter. Daddy's really proud of you. There are people in the US, they sleep with guns. With guns. It's not unheard of. How can you have a private arsenal in your home? And you this code to the American military, in my view, is a psychiatric disease and delirium of the American society. Yeah, great time that you bring him in.
Right. Matthew has a different way of expressing that, but I appreciate the dramatic performance. It's very Latin for blood. Like, that's like the stereotype. but it was wonderful. Thank you.
My dad and his family, they had guns collections and they loved guns. Unfortunately,
okay. You understand that mentality quite well.
It was not all. I mean, my father has hidden gun for the guerrilla as well. So it was for good purpose, against the dictatorship. So, but they knew all how to shoot. So we did a huge de-arming campaign at my home. So the dad would get rid of the gun. In the end, he got rid of the gun because I said, my dad used to hate a chihuahua that was barking the whole day. I'm gonna kill the dog. I'm gonna kill the dog, and we were afraid we would kill the owner dog. So we made a disarmament campaign at home.
Oh my God!
Preach what you say.
Exactly. I'm glad you're not a hypocrite. Okay. All right, cool. So I'm going to put up Matthew's interview, and we will stop, when you want to make comments and stuff, just so everyone knows, we will stop in between. And please, respond in the comments. We will also respond to those in the chat box.
I want to get to a time where Americans say, I'm going to store my nuke here at home in case I need it. In case the Chinese came, I want to have a private arsenal of nukes here. That's the next step. Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm so scared of that. That's horrible. Okay. All right. Here we are. We're going to come back to Earth with Matthew Ho.
Okay.
Matthew Ho, thank you so much for coming back on Empire Watch. This is your third time.
Well, thank you for having me back on, Ileana. I appreciate it.
I'm very excited about the conversation we're about to have. It covers a lot of things that, in general, that I think a lot of people need to know. And also, I personally have been very curious about and thinking about. So we're going to get into it. But of course, this week was the 62nd Munich Security Conference, which took place from February 13th to 15th this year. Sorry. Despite the media coverage that we've had since Trump's return to the White House, suggesting huge rifts within the power structures of the U.S. imperialist system, we've seen that the supposed pushback from Europe or Democrats in the U.S. the supposed left in the US have been largely performative. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio's speech at the Munich Security Conference simultaneously positions the US as the leader of the world and a victim at the mercy of all the global South countries that it exploits. When you examine this speech for logic, it completely falls apart, yet it was very positively received in Munich. Could you help break down the dynamics at play here?
Yeah, this is, as you said, the Munich Security Conference. First of all, thank you again for having me back on. But it's been, a decades-long thing. But in the last few years, it's become more celebratory. It's become more of almost a Davos-like experience, not focused on finance, but focused on militarism. And so it's a celebration, or if not a celebration, a theater, if you will, to set the stage for why there needs to be greater defense budgets to put out into the public consciousness the general narrative of the world structure of the West versus whoever, right? And then, of course, tying that all in together into policies. The Munich Security Conference has been dominated, of course, by the Ukraine-Russia war. For the last 4 years. And even before that, Russia dominated the focus of Munich for many years. So what we see here is we see in particular this year, what we saw was a parading of potential American Democratic presidential candidates for at Munich. And this is something that we've seen previously, but I don't think we've seen a full slate of candidates being put on daises, being put behind podiums, and given the opportunity to sell themselves to this crowd of militarists and imperialists and war profiteers, as we saw this last year, this past week. We saw Gavin Newsom there, we saw Gretchen Whitmer there, we saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez there, and almost all again trying out or pitching themselves or selling themselves to this crowd. So that was something with regards to Munich that I think is again makes you see that connection to the establishment, the elites, how they think and how they feel they have to present themselves and sell their policies, right? And as well as ensure the narrative remains intact, just in a similar way that we've seen again with Davos.
That's a really good comparison, because I was actually thinking about that. I was trying to think about something in terms of the U.S. national defense strategy and the U.S. Security strategy before Davos, and the way that Davos was it had this very performative quality that I sort of described in the question, where Trump came in there and basically said, we deserve Greenland, and it was this supposedly huge shakeup between the Europeans and the US. And I remember being very confused because they sent, the NATO troops to Greenland. And I was like, but also the US is part of NATO, and the US has a military base in Greenland. So it's like a ridiculous circus, but it did supposedly piss off, in quotation marks, Europeans who may have like an egotistical sort of attachment to this idea of equality with the US, right? And then this Marco Rubio speech, what I thought was interesting about it is that it's kind of like righting not the wrongs, but the supposed rift of that moment in Davos. And but can you speak a little bit more about how, because I think one of the things that's interesting about it is that it is so blatantly colonial. It is like we need to harken back to colonial times and resurrect our Western civilization that was historically amazing kind of thing. Paraphrasing. But I think it was also really lockstep in terms of the national defense strategy, which is like overtly imperial. Can you speak a little bit about that before we go into the parade of presidential candidates, as you mentioned?
Sure. You had, well, the last year, we've had this, as you said, a rift between the Americans and the Europeans. A lot of hurt feelings on the European side and a lot of arrogance on the American side. And I think the Americans were clearly demonstrating to the Europeans that in an empire, in an imperial structure, the only country that matters is the actual empire itself. And that Europe, they may have been the first among the subject nations, the first among the vassal nations, however you want to describe them. Maybe they would see themselves as junior partners. Maybe the Europeans felt that they had an investment in the American empire or owned a piece of the American empire, because the American empire essentially is an extension of their empires, right? The United States takes over as the global empire. Let's go back. So prior to World War II, the United States was one of several empires in the world. And then after World War II, there are two empires in the world, the United States and the Soviet Union. And then following the end of the Cold War, the demise of the Soviet Union, you have one empire. That's the United States. And the Europeans believed that they were in partnership with the United States, that their relationship was, again, one of being a junior partner, or again, first among the vassals, if you will. And the Trump administration has clearly pulled down any allusions to that this is an imperial structure and the United States is at the top, and that there is a hierarchy here. What Rubio's speech did, though, was to, as you said, heal that rift, soothe the hurt feelings. And one thing that was instructive was during the Greenland spat, and we still don't even really know how the whole issue with Greenland is being resolved, but it seems to have now kind of passed into some smoother waters, although with Donald Trump, those smooth waters never last for very long. But we did see during that rift, because Donald Trump publicly shared it, a text message, I believe it was, that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, sent to Donald Trump, basically saying, Donald, why are you doing this? We're allies. We can do great things together with Iran. You know, I mean, basically saying, like, why are you picking on us? We have a team here. Let's pick on the brown people. You know, that's where we're successful, right? I mean, like, it was really kind of a shocking text or a message to see, the thought process there. But that's how I think the Europeans have perceived it, this relationship, this team between the United States and Europe, where the Europeans, again, whether it's a legacy of their former empires or whether they're junior partners, they feel that they are indispensable to the United States. So Rubio essentially comes to Munich. And if we can also recall, a year ago at Munich, J.D. Vance, I think, really started the deterioration between European and American interests in this Trump administration. If people recall, there was a deterioration as well in the first Trump administration. But J.D. Vance, if people remember, a year ago went to Munich and essentially insulted the Europeans, all types of claims about a dying civilization, no free speech, as well as outreach to far right movements in Europe. But so Rubio's speech did extend an open hand. It did say, yes, Europe, you do have a place within the American structure. And I think more importantly, Rubio defined it not as an American vision, but a Western vision. And so that brings the Europeans back into the fold, whether that's, again, historically, which is what Rubio really stressed, because when Rubio talks about this great history of Western civilization that sends out, as he said, soldiers and explorers and missionaries to, essentially carry out genocide and enslave tens of millions of people, that was a European venture. And, so Rubio making very clear here that he sees the American empire as part of that lineage, that this is a this is continuity, that this is a continuous line of history. And so the Europeans naturally have a role in that. So, I think what we saw with effusiveness, with the energy in which the Europeans accepted what Rubio was saying. I mean, he got a standing ovation. What you get there is you have a bunch of happy vassals, essentially, that they're pleased that they are now back into this relationship with the United States. How long it will last for, again, this is Donald Trump. No one can tell. But this idea that this is not an American-centric structure, but a Western-centric structure. And that is upon the foundations upon which the American empire is built. And the Europeans naturally have a place in that no one else can fill. For the Europeans, it's important. I think you've got these incredibly unpopular leaders. Ileana, I saw a chart the other day of like the 20 most unpopular leaders in the world, and wow, Donald Trump wasn't even in the top 10. I mean, it's astounding, right? I mean, that's absolutely astounding that Donald Trump doesn't clock. It says a lot. Good for the Europeans, because it's primarily European leaders that were in that top 10. Good for the European public for understanding who their leaders are. And shame on the Americans for not being so drenched in partisan political identities that they can't even honestly state who Donald Trump is. But I think for the Europeans, this is important because this is part of their identity. We've already talked about the history of this, or the lineage that they come from, but in the sense that these are unpopular leaders, these are unpopular political parties. They have overseen a decline and a degradation of Europe's economy. They have deindustrialized it. They have hollowed it out. You look at the choices that I think European leaders have made over the last, say, 35 years since the end of the Cold War. The decision to continue with the American empire, to participate in its wars, to go along with its decisions, to endorse its priorities versus what the Europeans could have done for themselves, in the sense of why didn't Europe in the last 35 years become a hub for technology or a hub for education? Right. I mean, like, rather you see Europe that has lost its manufacturing capabilities. Again, it's deindustrialized. The public is under great duress from cost of living, housing issues, aging issues, climate change issues, as well as immigration issues. The far right, the right wing, is growing because the parties in power have done nothing to address the needs of the people. And so what's helpful then for these political leaders in these parties, whether it be, say, Starmer in Labour, or in the UK, or Macron or Merz, or even to the EU leadership in general, because how do you strengthen the EU, is this idea of having a foreign enemy, of having a distraction. Right, of having something to point to as to whether it be war or possibility of war. And that's one of the things you've seen as these talks to try and end the Ukraine-Russia war go forward. You just see from the Europeans and the European press this constant drumbeat that even if this war ends, there's going to be another one soon. Right? I mean, so that need for a wartime mentality, having a clear foreign enemy, is a key part of Europe's political leader and political parties' identity. And so now you bring that back into tying into what Rubio said there about being part of this Western empire, if you will, right? That gives you the foundation again, that gives you the space again, that puts you back into a place where you matter. And importantly, for your domestic politics, it gives you something to present to your constituencies for why they should keep you in power, because of, in this case, the danger coming from the East with, a danger that, and the Brits have used the danger of the Russians for 180 years now, or however long it's been. So, you saw what Rubio did there. But like I said, everything has to be caveated with this is Donald Trump, and as happy as the Europeans were following Rubio's speech, as Donald Trump continues forward, we'll see what happens with his border peace. The Europeans may not be so happy.
It's so I'm just curious what you think, Sara, about the Marco Rubio speech, because it really referenced something that we had talked about, with the whole Davos thing, where you rightly pointed out at that time, you were like, it just seems performative. The shifts are performative. And so this Marco Rubio speech, I don't know if you managed to catch it, but it was so incredible the way that he brought in this unity moment, hearkening back to Western imperialism, really hearkening back to colonialism, and being like, we can be this great civilization. This is our legacy. And he's just blatantly embracing colonialism. Did you have any thoughts about that? Or,
look, I haven't seen the speech. I was looking at here if we have shorts of the speech that we can put on from the audience. But what I think is very interesting that Matthew Ho indicate with his conversation is that he's talking about a split within the Trump administration. He's talking about Marco Rubio is not trying to align to a Western-centric structure of imperialism, while Trump wants to reinforce an American-centric structure.
No, I don't think. I think that's not right. I think the thing that was interesting actually about Marco Rubio's speech was the way that he did both. Because if we remember with the NATO,
I'm not saying about the Marco Rubio speech. I think Matthew Ho is pointing out something interesting within the speech. That Marco Rubio is trying to include here and say, this is a Western-centric enterprise joint venture. And what Trump has been doing is in the opposite direction in many ways, to say, no, it's America first. He needs to please MAGA. He needs to show, he's saying Trump is popular in America. Believe it or not, he's not in this list because he's highly popular and pushing the narrative, which is America first.
I'm disagreeing with you in terms of, I don't think this is a split between Marco and Trump. What Marco Rubio has done, which is actually very, very effective for the Trump administration, is he's managed to still emphasize the American first leadership, supposed leadership. He's still doing that. He's still really taking the national security strategy forward, the national defense strategy forward, under the American first thing, but he is managing to also bring in the thing of and we don't want to leave you Europeans behind. We can do this together.
Which Trump never did. Which Trump demonstratively did the opposite. Look at Greenland. He demonstratively said, Europe, you are a vassal, and I'm downgrading you for what you actually is, which you are a vassal. And I think that arrived very well with the American public.
Well, I'm saying that this is not a split with Marco Rubio, but Marco Rubio is continuing that strategy, but showing the different tactics that the US is using currently to do that. Because even when he was, Trump was doing those things, and I think that's one thing that Matthew was kind of saying, is that Trump's narrative is not as disciplined as Marco Rubio in this speech, because he goes back and forth and he's a little bit all over the place. But if you look at the overall trajectory of what he's saying and Marco Rubio is doing it very, very aggressively, extremely aggressively, but also with a unified polish. But they essentially are facing the same way. And it's little tactics within the overall arch, because it's an extremely aggressive speech. It uses rhetoric he talks about the godless communist countries that we have to be against. He is
guess what? It was not the communists eating children.
Yeah, he is really something else. The line between communism and freedom ran through the heart of Germany. He's talking about the Berlin Wall falling. He's going back to Cold War rhetoric, but bringing it forward to be yes, America first, but you vassal states are also welcome to stay in our empire. You know, it's not a real shift from Trump, but it's way more polished. And I think to Matthew's point of it, like they're trotting out the presidential candidates for the next election. And Marco Rubio is showing himself to be a genuine.
That's why Marco Rubio, as much as he's aggressive, he has a intention to be the next president, and he's trying to distinguish himself from Trump to say this is a Western-centric structure where you fit in.
Agree.
And why? You know, I think Marco Rubio is a statement, a very seasoned one, and I think he is trying in publicly. And he knows he's in Munich. He is a born and bred politician. He knows he's in Munich. He's in foreign land. He's in German land. Everyone is afraid of the Germans. So I think, what Matthew, I haven't seen the speech, but what Matthew is saying is clearly, Rubio's speech is moving from a American-centric structure to a Western-centric structure to include Europe, to make them feel included.
It's not a European. It's just a tactic. Like, I think when you look at this speech, it's very clear that Marco Rubio, in some ways, is even more hawkish than Trump.
Yeah.
And he's even more American first than Trump in some ways. So it's more that he's showing himself to be a more polished politician, considering he's in Munich, rather than a genuine shift towards Eurocentric. He's not in any way giving up any of the
that's
power.
what Matthew is saying. His rhetoric is a shift. His actions is a different thing, but
it's not even like the rhetoric. I mean, I would say just to say Eurocentric is kind of the wrong, in my opinion, description of his speech, because he's still very much positioning an American first thing. He's just saying we don't want to
say Western-centric.
Western-centric, but U.S. as primary, definitely U.S. as primary. Even though there's certainly, I think, to your point though, is that there's a certain acknowledgement of the fact that the U.S. can't really do it alone, but they're certainly arrogant enough to be like, we must be the leader, you know. But yeah, I mean, here is his speech here, but I mean, we're not going to play it in full, obviously, and I don't want to lose where we are. Yeah, it is 30 minutes, so we can't really play it.
Yeah, I mean, Marco Rubio for 30 minutes, really, I'll have to have taken some medicines before that.
It is horrifying. It's like, really, I mean, because, you know, he is saying things like thousands of years of Western civilization hung in the balance, talking about the Cold War, you know, but we were driven by a common purpose. You know, he's really saying that sort of rhetoric, but at the same time, making it very clear U.S. is in the primary position. Western civilization, and, you know, is something that we should embrace, be proud of. It is our cultural heritage. Obviously not me, look at my face, but I mean, like for them, it's their cultural heritage, you know. He says, under President Trump, the United States of America will once again take on the task of renewal and restoration, driven by a vision of a future as proud, as sovereign, and as vital as our civilization's past. So it is this sense of Western imperialism, Western colonialism. Let's bring back the greatness of that. But to your point, he's very much more polished. Like, for the United States and Europe, we belong together. So
that's not what Trump's been saying or doing.
I mean, I think Trump is undisciplined, but it's more like tactics versus core principles. I think their core principles are aligned, but their tactics, like, I think Marco Rubio is actually kind of like, he's not just dangerous, but like, he's more polished. His tactics are more, I mean, insane, by the way. If you watch
Marco Rubio is probably saying, look, Trump, it's a very subtle way to expose Trump, you know, because Trump goes to Europe and say the craziest thing. You know, Greenland belongs to us. It's just because we gave it to Denmark, we're going to get it back. I mean, it's unheard the American president put things in such terms. You know, now you have Europe. There is an antagonization with Europe, has been a fixed line of Trump, antagonizing. And it seems that Marco Rubio in his speech is not antagonized with that, has included them in that.
Yeah,
Whether
because
America first or not, he's not going there to Munich to antagonize. And this is a way to mark and to market himself to the Europeans. You know, let's take off this crazy guy Trump, because I think we share a civilization. We share the values, and they do share this. It's not completely bogus.
It's not at all bogus. It's that's why when we talk about U.S. imperialism and U.S. empire, we're talking about Western imperialism with the U.S. currently in the leading position. But that does not excuse the participatory nature of all these other elements of imperialism, right? But to your point, I think this is really, you hit it on the head, where because he actually says this here, because he is aware of how Trump comes off. This is someone very dangerous, because like Rubio's mindset is as psychotic as Trump, if not more psychotic than Trump. But he is aware of how Trump alienated people. So he even says here, and so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe. So he is couching what Trump has done in
he's
the
preparing
more
his presidential campaign on like differentiating himself from Trump. I could be a truth teller, isn't it? Let me see the cards. King of Wands. Marco Rubio wants to win the election. Marco Rubio is starting.
Remember when he was a presidential candidate against Trump, and Trump called him Little Rubio, and then there was a time when he was drinking a water bottle, and like Trump made fun of him being like thirsty little Rubio. And now look at him.
Yeah,
like he is now.
Rubio's he's a very dangerous man to Trump listens to. But we're gonna see now he's trying to be
the statesman.
He's a born and bred politician, which Trump isn't. So he knows, he decodes the game far better. And he's seen here in Trump craziness, American-centric, explicitly open. He sees an opportunity for him to play the moderate and the sane and the reasonable.
He's not moderate at all.
But he's playing, he wants to play the reasonable, the moderate, the alternative to Trump craziness.
I mean, he's not moderate at all. Like I would say,
he wants to play. Listen to my whole
sentence. It's not moderate in any way. It's not moderate. There's a polish to it, but it's not in any way moderate. Like
he wants to play.
No, Sarah, he goes way further. He even goes further than Trump. It's just that he says it in...
He's a fascist, a full-blown fascist.
In a nice way, in quotations, in a manipulative way for Europeans who still have the same egocentric, genocidal impulses. You know, they still do have this sense of, we are the garden, you guys are the jungle, we can do whatever we want to you, jungle people. You know, the Europeans that still have this mindset, the colonial mindset, he's playing to them, but he is extremely extreme. There's nothing moderate about this speech. It's actually a shocking speech. Like if you, I actually haven't, even Trump doesn't go this, like Trump is all over the place. There's nothing cohesive about him. Like, you know, he will say like 20 different things in a speech that will, I mean, to be fair, his speeches are like 2 hours long. So like, he's just like all over the place. Whereas this is a very, very disciplined colonial speech, a very disciplined fascist dictatorial type of like colonial Western civilization speech. It is so, so dangerous. But yes, to your point, he's appearing like the statesman. He's not at all, though, when you actually listen to the words. But yeah, it's terrible. Any last thoughts before I continue?
I'm more afraid of Rubio than I am of Trump.
I think we should be, because, you know, especially he had a standing ovation. So I mean,
why he had a standing ovation? He knows to play the game.
He knows the egocentric nature of these people. These are like, you know, Matthew started the interview by saying celebratory imperialists. Essentially, they're celebrating their power and their power structure. And these are those people. So, okay. So any more and we'll continue.
It's an amazing interview. It's an amazing interview. Let's crack on. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Okay, cool. Interesting. I mean, you pointed out so many interesting points, because I do think, like, from an anti-imperialist, and I would say leaning Marxist, I say leaning Marxist about myself because I am sort of like educating myself on Marxism and socialism more and more now. But I think from the anti-imperialist global South, wanting a multilateral world point of view, you know, of course, we've been emphasizing a lot what U.S. imperialism is, and it's a system and a policy, a system and power structure over the world. And I think, like, the interesting thing about Rubio's speech is that he lays it pretty bare. Like, one of the reasons why imperialism is so successful, you know, like in terms of for us in the global north, is that most people just really think there's no other alternative to imperialism. If we're thinking of imperialism as the high stage of capitalism, like, most people think there is absolutely no other system that could possibly be in existence. So we don't acknowledge US imperialism. We don't acknowledge a system of imperialism or infrastructure of imperialism, because that's just the world, you know? And he's like putting it out there, which I think, one, signals sort of the weakness right now of US imperialism as it's sort of declining. You can see now the puppet strings, you know what I mean? Like, so he's actually saying things like godless anti-communist, like godless communism. You know, he's just laying out the Cold War rhetoric straight up, positioning imperialism against communism, like, in his speech, which is so interesting. In some ways, it's somewhat helpful for us to have a so-called, not an enemy, but a target that's just like, this is our evil plan. This is what we need to do. And, you know, there's no like subterfuge almost in terms of that. Whereas I think, you know, and I think you've kind of, I'm going to pull up an X quote from you, but I think, like, the other people in attendance at the Munich Security Conference, Hillary Clinton, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Gavin Newsom was another one that you mentioned. They have, like, they're also faces of US imperialism, but from a different tradition, like a sort of the civil liberties type of face of US imperialism. I thought it was interesting how, for example, Alexandra AOC, she talked about USAID, like wanting that back, you know, because that sort of suggests the US in leadership position. But anyway, I'm going to put up your X quote here, because I do think that it's a really interesting point that you made that I'd love you to articulate more on. But here you say, the Trump admin accepts the unipolar world is gone and we are in a multipolar world. That explains their strategies and worldview, but the reshaping of the US empire is not to share this new world order, but to dominate it. Views like AOC refuse to accept loss of unipolar power. I found this to be a really interesting way to differentiate between these two. Like, am I overstating your position when I say that that's kind of what you mean in terms of the differences? But please explain further.
Can you repeat the last thing you said that you cut out just for a brief second?
Oh, sorry. Like, basically, I was trying to say that am I overstating your point in this, where basically, let me put this back on. You're kind of differentiating between, like, figures like AOC, who, like I was saying, is still a face of US imperialism, but it's a face of imperialism that is hearkening back to the US as a moral leader in the world. USAID was something that she mentioned. As we know, in the global South, USAID is often used for regime change purposes. It's by no means an actual benevolent force in the global South, but it's something that the US has used really effectively to kind of show this, you know, this leadership role in the world. And so basically, that's what I'm asking you to clarify, is that kind of what you're saying when you say that she refuses to accept the loss of unipolar power, but actually the Trump admin is accepting that, and yet, you know, It's like their rhetoric is more aggressive. But you're saying that that is because they're actually accepting that the unipolar world is gone.
Yes, yeah, and that's something I'll give the Trump administration credit for, is for accepting that this idea of a multipolar world is not something that's coming, as we often hear commentators say, "Oh, the multipolar world's coming." Now, the multipolar world is here now, and that's why you've seen not just the Trump administration's rhetoric and policy announcements, but also their actions. I mean, this is the prime reason behind Donald Trump's trade war with everyone, essentially. He wants to have direct bilateral agreements with nations. He doesn't want the United States to be a party to treaties or agreements or conventions. He wants to use the weight of the United States to get, in his words, the best deal possible from each individual nation. So you can look at it and say, well, look, Donald Trump, he's withdrawing from all these various agreements, and the United States is retreating, which is what you'll hear people like Ocasio-Cortez say, or other liberal commentators, and also neoconservative commentators in the United States. And that's not the case at all. What you have there, I think, with these commentators, whether they be Democratic or Republican leaning, is this urgent need to invest into their articulation of what's occurring, some type of domestic political dynamic. So this is why you see Ocasio-Cortez talking about Donald Trump retreating, right? This is why you see Hillary Clinton talking about immigration and saying, my husband, deported more people than Donald Trump ever did. Why can't he, like this type of, right? I mean, this type of us versus them, very binary description of of Donald Trump's actions, because that is the framework in which they unfortunately not just view domestic politics, but world politics. But essentially, this idea is that the Trump administration, again, understands that we are in a multipolar world now, and the United States empire needs to be able to not just compete in that world, but dominate it. Again, there's a lot of misrepresentation of what Trump is doing as retreating, and it's simply not that. It is a recalculus, it's a resizing, a reshaping, however you want to describe it. It's an anchoring the United States in the Western Hemisphere in order to extract more from the Western Hemisphere. It doesn't mean the United States is not going to be involved in Africa or Asia or Europe or anywhere else. It just means that the United States under Donald Trump looks at the Western Hemisphere, sees that the vast majority of Latin American states have China as their trading partner, and the Trump administration is aghast at that. These are countries that should be trading with the U.S. This is where people may be familiar with this term, friendshoring, should be occurring. And friendshoring is this idea in trade where you are doing business with those countries that you're allied with or you have good relations with in order to get the best deal, right? In order to have the best exchange, the best terms of commerce, et cetera. And of course, the Trump vision is that, no, these are countries that we can shake down. These are countries that we can really lean on. And so I think that helps explain the Trump emphasis on the Western Hemisphere. And there are other indicators that go into that. There are other factors. There are people who come to this with their ideologies, people who come to this with their personal history. Certainly Marco Rubio's personal history helps explain the emphasis right now the Americans are placing on Cuba, right? Cuba has been Marco Rubio's white whale, if you will, for his entire life. So, of course, there are other factors like that. But, this idea of, we were saying with regards to, say, Ocasio-Cortez, of not allowing for the United States to no longer be the unipolar power is, comes from a number of factors. One, it's this idea that the United States has a good thing going, being the sole empire. So why even consider anything else? Another is just an ignorance. And I think if people watched Ocasio-Cortez's numerous interviews, as well as Whitmer, as well as Newsom, the other potential Democratic presidential candidates that were there, you'll see just the base ignorance, just an unfamiliarity that was that was covered up by just the usual tropes. So you saw that with their statements. So some of this was simply it can be explained, this refusal to accept the multipolar world as a emperor has no clothes moment. Simply they haven't been informed. And others, they'll hold on to this idea that the U.S. does still dominate in many areas. If you look at, say, in military affairs, the dominance of the United States, that we could get a conversation of that. I think that's hollow to a great degree. But for those within the empire, the fact that we have 11 aircraft carriers, we have 750 bases around the world, we have $1 trillion defense budget, that in alone shows our dominance, shows our primacy. Other things to point to is our primacy in tech, which of course is getting eclipsed faster and faster by competition, say, from China. But I think they will look at aspects of tech, such as social media, and see the dominance of Instagram or Twitter, or the fact that if a rival comes up, we'll just take it over like we did TikTok. And then that is extrapolated to have this belief that the United States still remains the world's sole superpower, that we're the only ones who can do something like this. And this, of course, is simply missing the forest for the trees. And, there's also, too, the need to maintain this sole status as the unipolar power. There is institutional legacies at stake here that don't allow for any deviation. I mean, so can you imagine someone like an Antony Blinken or a Jake Sullivan from the Biden administration, or the vast numbers of neoconservatives through Washington, D.C., ever admitting that the United States was no longer the sole superpower, that the United States wasn't under the control of the United States? Now, they wouldn't say it that way, because particularly the neoliberal side of that equation couches everything with rhetoric and optics that make it appear as if the United States is concerned with human rights, that the United States is progressive, that the United States, if it's an empire, it's a benevolent empire. And here, I think many people have probably seen that meme of a drone flying over wherever, Pakistan, Somalia, what have you, and the people in the people in the meme say the next one is going to be piloted by a woman, right? Or the bombs that are being dropped are rainbow colored bombs, right? I mean, so I think that is the way that those on the neoliberal side of the American empire, what we call the liberal interventionists, would couch themselves. So the idea that we are and this is where USAID comes in. And don't get me wrong, I think, you should have a development agency. You should have, for a country with the wealth and the size, the economy of the United States, there should be a capacity to help other nations develop, to help poor, to eradicate disease, to provide for emergency relief, disaster relief, to end famines, on and on and on, right? We should be doing something like that. USAID was certainly not the vehicle to do that through, because it was so corrupted in its use to achieve American foreign policy objectives. It was many times just a cutout for the Central Intelligence Agency. But, so what you have then is you have this idea that, oh, look, we have done these programs, in this country and that country that have promoted, name the issue. But there still is the support for dictatorial or oppressive governments. One thing is, there are 12 countries that have on their books the death penalty as the consequence for homosexuality. The U.S. sends weapons to 9 of those 12 countries. Right. I mean, just to show the hypocrisy there. So as well as, too, even if that country is not under repressive leadership, the fact that we're supporting an LGBT community, in this country doesn't mean that we're not extracting from it, looting it, raping it, essentially, in the same manner that has been done through the centuries by the West. You know, the estimates are for extraction, for every dollar the West puts into the global South, it extracts between $4 and $16. Right. So just because we're doing some type of community care, just because we're doing some type of development work, just because we're providing some degree of foreign assistance, or we're promoting some type of civil liberties, doesn't mean that we're still not stealing from them. And I think that is what those who represent that liberal interventionist, neoliberal, civil liberties, human rights oriented aspect of the empire are hiding. And, you know, so you pull out together, you look at what those who are confronting the Trump administration in terms of its desire to reshape the American empire, you see that they're just trying to hold on to a good thing, that they refuse to accept the multipolar world, because that would threaten the institutions they belong to, that would threaten the extraction the United States is currently under, and as well as it would threaten their own narratives. You know, and certainly Donald Trump is not changing any of that. Donald Trump and his people are looking at this and say, if we want to continue to dominate, if we want to continue to extract, you know, this is one of the things why so many Americans are hysterical and have been hysterical about the Chinese, is the fear that the Chinese are going to cut into our good thing, right? So they look at Central America, they look at South America, and they see how much business China is doing there. And the Americans say, that's our backyard, that's our property. How dare the Chinese take advantage of the Central Americans and South Americans? They're ours to take advantage of, right? I mean, so that's the hysteria. That's where a lot of hysteria comes from regarding the Chinese. So the Trump administration, they see that and they say, how do we better reshape our empire? How do we better restructure it in order not just to compete in this multipolar world, but to continue to dominate? And so I think that's the clash you have in American foreign policy right now, whether to try and keep the, you know, dead hand, the grip on the unipolar role of the United States, or accept the multipolar world and figure out a way to dominate that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you also this perception from the West that that China is doing the exact same things as the US all over the world, just not based in fact. You know, there's no evidence that China would do that. I mean, one, they just don't have the infrastructure to do what the US does, like in terms of the military infrastructure across the world, you know, and also too, like it really doesn't benefit China to act like the US. And I think that is one of the things that the US is really having trouble with. Like you're kind of pointing to, well, you did point to much more eloquently, but there's the elephant in the room is that the US empire is declining. It is in extreme decline. You know, it maybe never really was able to sustain a genuine hegemony in the first place, but now it's just in very, very clear decline. And you have one side, Marco Rubio, who is funnily, like he did say in his speech, we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline.
I think you muted, Ileana.
I'm muted. Yes. Any thoughts on that? Part.
Yeah, I think Matthew who introduced a very original thought. I haven't heard this thought yet. He's saying Trump trade war is an expression or proof of his understanding and knowledge about the declining US hegemony.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And he's saying that this is a perception that he thinks liberals, okay, he and Democrats are still defying. And I have to say, it's as a response, he says Trump has this incredibly aggressive policies to restate American great again. And I mean, if you think, it makes total sense, because the whole MAGA movement is about this acknowledgement.
Right.
Yeah, they are seeing their own problems from inside, and they are thinking they're losing. Yeah.
Yeah, they're perceiving the decline in power as the reason for their hardship, which is precisely what you're saying, right? Like that Trump taps into this idea of like, we are being victimized by global South countries. They are taking what's ours.
So I thought this was very interesting because it's a new thought. Look, Trump, there is a level of rationality here in Trump of acknowledging what is a cohesive institutional perception in America, that we are still number one. And I have to say, this cohesive institutional perception of being an empire is the psychological framework of British institutions and some of the population still today working within the government. You can say they still have this cohesive interpretation of the world where they occupied a place of hegemon and dominance, being by association with America or being by the past experience, which is far from glorious, but they leave out of the myth. But in a way, I have to say it might be less dangerous to work with the delusional Democrats that still think they are the best with this extremely unleashed power that has no limits to wants to reclaim whatever it costs its position. And as you say, internally, this speech is expressed by the MAGA. We are being victimized. It's not our policies. It's not because we don't have a health system. It's not because we don't have a social system. It's not because we are hijacked by corporations in our political power. It's because of China. Mm-hmm. It's because of Latin America. We have to reclaim spheres of influence, and they fall back to this extremely anachronic thought and structure in a world that doesn't exist anymore. So in this sense, I think the Trump administration is more delusional because the way they want to reclaim unipolarity, it's not aligned with the world today.
Right. I mean, you have a point. Like, it's
part of the delirium is to overplay the American power for themselves. So if in one way the Trump administration is more rational and has go away from this institutional perception that Democrats still express, in another way, the solution he poses to it is extremely fascist, backwards, from another century. And I love the way he gave the best definition of Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez, a base ignorance. There is not one subject that she doesn't display ostensibly her ignorance. On Palestine, I remember the first time when she arrived in power and they asked about Palestine, she said, well, this is foreign policy. I'm worried about the New Yorkers or whatever, or the Americans, it's Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez is the textbook case for base ignorance, proud ignorance. She does not improve. She does not get any better. But she's a beautiful woman, Latino, New York, a bit of a Jennifer Lopez, where people was a perfect iconic for people to project on her whatever they want to project, whatever it was sold to them. But her base ignorance is shocking. I haven't seen one single example where this is not ostensibly displayed. I love this definition of Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, like, to your point, it's not, and we talk about this later because we get into Matthew's article, which is really good. Actually, I'm going to put the link in the chat.
Yeah.
But essentially, and also I quote from Marco Rubio's speech again, it's like really these two parts. One, like you're saying, maybe slightly more delusional because the Democrats aren't really fully embracing the idea that the U.S. it's not even hegemony, like in a full sense, but the power has declined really quite substantially. The multipolar world is inevitable, or here, as Matthew would say. And then on the other side, you're right, doubling down on the only strategy they have. But it's like both of them. What is more dangerous? Like for the rest of us, like you might have a point that the more supposed moderate, that's not really a moderate, which is the Democrats that still care about the civil face, that still care about the mask on, might be less dangerous because they have to be slower in their
But they
destruction.
are not dialoguing with facts yet. They are still believing. They
Right.
still believe in the myth, so they are less prepared for the attack. You know,
Right.
I think, and when you say Trump is a businessman, nevertheless,
Exactly. Yeah. So
and
true.
they need to make profit, they need to make numbers, they need, you know, with this whole fascism that is arising in America. I think Trump is the rise of fascism. I have to say, yes, as nation said, yes, it is fascist. We have to deploy this word for what's going on in America now, make America great again under any costs. Yeah, it's very interesting what he said. It was the first time I hear under this lens, this perspective, the way that he broke down and the way he said, well, Trump trade war is proof, MAGA is proof, is the proof and acknowledgement that they know they have lost hegemony. Democrats is still living in the dream. Sleep tight.
And okay, so we'll continue the interview where he talks about why he's
amazing interview, Ileana. Well done on that. Amazing guest.
Thank you. I mean, Matthew is wonderful. So yeah, we'll continue. And then you have on the other side, I guess, like to your point, really, AOC and Gavin Newsom, etc., that are really like, no, but we can still manage it if it wasn't for Trump, you know?
Right.
And there's sort of like, I think there is a deep denial here that the decline has come. It's absolutely inevitable. And I think reading your article, now I'm going to bring up your Substack article.
Yeah, I'll just say that, you know, I think that the way you just described it there is a really great description, Ileana. You know, essentially, you have Rubio at Munich saying this decline, this great period of civilization, this great imperial structure the West built is falling apart. And with your help, Europe, we're going to take it back. We're going to rebuild it, right? And meanwhile, you have those opposing the part of the American establishment that just keeps saying Ocasio-Cortez, although there are many others. Let's just use her because she's the most prominent in this, are saying, no, everything's fine. We just need to go back to how things were and everything will be fine. And I think that's the dynamic we're seeing here.
Yeah, that's a really, yeah, exactly. That's how I was trying to say. It's like, really, they're not that different. It's just tactics. They're just different in terms of tactics. But like I was saying, there is still this delusional, at least from your article, you have convinced me that there is a deep denial about the reality, which is, okay, so I'm going to bring up your article because it points up these very, very tangible things. I think a lot of people without your experience and background and everything are really not going to understand, like, but the tangible realities of the American military. But I'm going to bring this up, and I'm terrible at the technicals of this, but let's see if this worked. Yes, it's here is your article from your Substack, Matt's Thoughts on War and Peace, a Diminishing Special Providence. And I'm going to quote from here where you say, the American military is overextended, limited in its resources, unable to be reliably resupplied by U.S. industry, and commanded by incompetent generals and admirals. It is a military in grave danger of defeat over the course of the campaign and of failing to achieve U.S. objectives. And then you do talk about specifically about Iran in this article, saying war with Iran would not just be another illegal and immoral war, but another unwinnable and stupid one as well. I think so many things to talk about this article, but I think that's one of the things, though. I mean, the first thing that just comes to mind is just this idea of like we said, there are these opposing tactics, this denial that the U.S. empire really is in decline, and I think inevitably so. But
well, I mean, you can also make the point too, Ileana, that there's a denial that there even is an empire.
Right. Yes.
I mean, that is a for, if you were in Washington D.C., you would find many in the foreign policy sphere, not just regular non-foreign policy people, but foreign policy establishment types who would argue to their blue in the face that the United States is not an empire. So, I mean, I think you just have that refusal to accept reality, which is all part of the narrative of that. If you do tie them down and say, we've got 750 bases around the world, you know, on and on, they'll say, well, we're a benevolent empire. You know, we never, right? We never.
They want us there.
Yeah, they want us there. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Yeah. But I think the thing that this kind of is sort of striking to me is just this like weird it's not a weird contradiction, but it's almost inevitable within this paradigm where it's like, on one hand, because unipolarity and imperialism just requires growth and expansion. I mean, it's not just the sustaining of a hegemony, which they never really genuinely achieved, but it has to keep on growing and expanding, has to keep hoarding capital. That's part of its nature, like of imperialism, right? So it's almost inevitable that the only thing they can double down on right now is military strength, because it's the only thing they've been investing in for the past few decades. They're not investing in a productive economy. They're just so-called investing in their military, because I think what you're showing in your article is that the financialization of the capitalist system, the debt, you know, it's a debt-driven financialization system. They don't care about the productive, tangible results, you know, even when investing in the military. But it seems like they are absolutely stuck on doubling down on this trajectory. And it's almost like they don't have any other path forward for expansion. But can you sort of explain a little bit, of course, not a little bit, but as much as you can on these tangible examples of this supposed military prowess that is really sort of collapsing?
And I think you're exactly right about that. You know, the sociologist or historian Michael Mann, who, you know, has written a number of great works on empire. You know, he states, you know, empire works along four lines: military, economic, political, and cultural. And if you look at it, you certainly can see that diminishment of three of those four lines of American authority in the world over the last generation or so. So the political control that the United States had worldwide in terms of its ability to enforce discipline or control things such as the United Nations is long past. And, you know, a lot of it has to do with the United States' own destruction of international law, international order, international institutions. The system that the United States put in place, created following World War II, you know, is largely being dismantled. And that, of course, is a detriment to the United States. The economic order, you know, I'll do a whole show on that. But the economic order, the monetary order that the United States creates, you know, 1944, Bretton Woods. The United States, the entire industrialized world is essentially destroyed from the war, except for the United States. So the United States inherits the world as the world's economic leviathan, and it writes the rules for the world's economic order and for the world's monetary order. And, you know, again, the United States, because, you know, as you were saying, through processes of financialization, which really gets into this concept of rents and extraction, you know, becomes fat and happy. And, you know, it seeks to continue to monetize its place as the world's hegemon or attempted hegemon. And so it wants to just take from others. In doing so, it seeks to profit off of extraction. It seeks to profit from outsourcing. It seeks to profit from having a strong dollar policy wherein it could sell off all its industry, buy industry overseas, or ship its industry overseas to places where the costs are lower. Because with our policies, with our reserve currency, with everyone buying our debt, et cetera, you know, America can be a nation of importers. And then when that starts to run afoul for a host of reasons, including geopolitical reasons, essentially nations no longer trusting the United States, wanting to find better alternatives because of American policies, such as a sanctions policy that sanctions more than 60 countries, more than almost a third of the world is under American sanctions. Nations now try and find alternatives, and that is pulling apart. One of the things that's pulling apart the United States' economic and monetary dominance in the world. And then cultural, which I think of those four lines of empire, cultural was the most important for the United States. We had Hollywood. But now with social media, now with the ability of people to share information and see what's occurring around the world, not filtered through an American entertainment or media structure, you have an understanding of the United States as an empire. And that's occurring here in the United States. There was a survey done a year or two ago where young Americans, the way they defined the United States was as a dying empire or a failing empire led by bad people, right? So if empire needs to be set upon a foundation, a foundational narrative that ensures that your people believe in it, let alone your subjects around the world, the vassals around the world, those, right? Then it simply can't continue. And I think that's at the point we're at now. But the military aspect of it is one that has held out the longest, I think. And that is one of the reasons for that is because for these other reasons, to forsake the political, the cultural, the economic, the United States has invested in its military. And I think if you go and you look at the history of empires, you see that as empires start to fail, as they start to die, they grasp onto militarism as a way to maintain control, as a way to maintain power. It's not that hard of a concept to really understand why they would do that, right? But what you see, though, is you see this mass investment in the American military. Not just in monetary investment, $1 trillion a year for the Pentagon, but also too in the priority, the focus of America's policies, where America's foreign policy is by no means a diplomatic foreign policy, it's a militarized foreign policy, as well as too, you have essentially the United States running a wartime economy. You can make the argument that the United States never left the wartime economy of World War II. But now you're getting to the point where that prioritization has hollowed out other parts of your economy, and you've not been investing in your people, whether it's through healthcare or education or infrastructure, because you're spending 75% of the discretionary federal budget on the Pentagon, on care for veterans for past wars, and on law enforcement and prisons. That's where roughly 75% of the discretionary federal budget of the United States goes to, right? And you can keep doing that. I think everyone can understand how you end up having a hollow economy. And that's essentially what the United States is dealing with now. But that then at some point is going to creep into the military, because this structure of extraction, financialization, right, of rent seeking, that has filtered, that has, of course, it has gotten into the military structure, into what Dwight Eisenhower in 1961 called the military industrial complex. And what you now have is you have a Pentagon budget, again, of $1 trillion, whose purpose is not to maintain the national security of the American people, but is to gain profit for corporations. That's why I don't like, Ileana, you'll see those diagrams a lot, or explanations about how the American military budget is more than the next 10 countries combined. And I don't particularly, 8 of which are American allies, by the way. And I don't particularly like that comparison, because most of the other countries' budgets, their military budgets, are not meant for profit. Its primary purpose is not the profits of private corporations, while that's the purpose of the American military budget. And so what you then have is you have an American military that half the money they receive goes directly to corporations. So of the $1 trillion the United States will give to the Pentagon this year, more than half of that, about almost 55%, I believe, will go to corporations. right? It doesn't go to the troops. It doesn't go to, I mean, it goes to corporations. And so what you then have is you have a hollowed out military, and you see this in the sense of that we have the smallest air force in terms of planes, but we're spending by far the most we've ever spent on the Air Force. The same thing, too. We have the smallest Navy since World War II, but we are spending more on the Navy than any other time since World War II, right? So you have these two things where essentially the American taxpayer is getting ripped off here. I mean, this is a racket. And that's, of course, what it probably all was ever meant to be. So you see that in a sense of the maintenance rate or the availability rates for aircraft, just how few aircraft are actually available to be used by the American Air Force or by the American Navy or Marine Corps, in terms of their rates. And it's we may have 100 of X type of aircraft, but only 35% actually can fulfill its actual mission. One example for this coming war with Iran, show why the Americans are serious, is we have what are called E-3 Sentries. These are the big airliner-looking planes that have the big revolving radar disc on top, and they're incredibly important. Their purpose is to manage the airspace in the region. So these would be the aircraft that direct American fighter planes and bombers, but also most importantly for this coming war, these are the aircraft that would direct the fighters as well as the ground and sea-based missile systems that would attempt to interdict Iranian missiles and drones. So these are incredibly important airplanes. The United States has sent 6 to the region. That's essentially all that the United States has. The United States used to have more than 30 of these airplanes. Now they have only 16. The replacement for these airplanes, because these airplanes are decades old, is long overdue, just like so many other aspects of American military procurement. It's just a failing system, and it can't provide the equipment when they say they're going to provide it, let alone that it actually works. But so you have 6 out of 16 of these aircraft being deployed. But when you look at what's called the mission capable rate, which means how many airplanes are available, how many are operating, and how many are in maintenance, you see that the mission capability rate is about 53 or 54%, which means, okay, there aren't, you're now sending 6 of roughly 8 available aircraft. And then when you get into fully mission capable rate, which is another step beyond that, you're probably looking at the fact that the United States sent every available E-3 it had to the region, which shows that, the United States is serious about this war with Iran. But also, too, you say for $1 trillion, we only have 6 of these things. And you can make the same point about a host of other pieces of equipment. You look at the aircraft carriers. The United States is sending the Gerald Ford to the Mediterranean. The Gerald Ford was the aircraft carrier that was sent from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean to take part in the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. So the United States has 11 aircraft carriers. Actually, we have 12 right now because one's being decommissioned and one's being brought onto the service. But okay, so we've got, say 11 because that's what they usually have. We have to send the Ford back to the Mediterranean. The Lincoln's already there. What about the other 9 aircraft carriers? They're simply not available because you have 6 aircraft carriers out of 11 that are not available. So that's why you're seeing the Ford getting sent back to the Mediterranean, and the Ford is likely to break the record for the longest aircraft carrier at sea. And you say, how's this possible? We spend $15 billion on these aircraft carriers. We've got 11 of them. We got to keep sending the same one back and forth across the world. We don't have any more. And you can make the same argument about a host of other, but it just shows the paucity, right? It shows the hollowness of the American force. And then there are other aspects too of this in terms of, say, missile stocks. If people recall from the war in June between Israel, the United States, and Iran, it was essentially a war of missiles. And, many of us believe that the United States, Donald Trump, acted with those B-2 bomber strikes to provide a bit of theater, to provide an excuse to end the war because the Americans and the Israelis were running out of missiles. And there's the history for that. If you go back to the U.S. Air war against the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, so go back 10 years or so, the United States was running out of bombs and missiles then as well. If you look at certainly the United States support for Ukraine over the last 4 years, the United States has been unable by a wide margin to provide the necessary munitions that Ukraine needs to fight the war. So this is an issue with American industrial capacity that has been understood for years. And so now you're talking about, though, engaging in a war with Iran where you've already shown that your munitions, you can't provide enough to sustain warfare. You don't have enough equipment to actually prosecute the war or sustain it. And then most importantly for me is you see the competence of American military leadership. You have now generals and admirals who are in command, who went through the Iraq and Afghan wars, those wars that were not just illegal and immoral, but incredibly counterproductive. And they never said a word about it. These are the men and women who, when Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth assembled them in that auditorium in Quantico, Virginia, last fall to give that pep rally, essentially, and basically lay down the law in terms of following Hegseth's vision for a white, Christian, patriarchal, nationalist American military. When Donald Trump said, if you don't like what we're saying, get up and leave, none of them did. And so when you then look at the performance of the American military over the years, you can talk about Iraq and Afghanistan, of course, but more recently, the fact that the Houthis, Ansar Allah, drove both the Navy out of the American Navy out of the Red Sea twice under the Biden administration, under the Trump administration. The United States Navy had to execute essentially a face-saving truce with the Houthis, which was essentially an American retreat from the Red Sea, a Houthi victory twice over the American Navy. You've seen the same thing in Ukraine. There was a story in the New York Times about a year ago from Adam Entosh, and I encourage people to read this. This documents what many of us have been saying for years, but the American generals, particularly the first 2 years of the Ukraine-Russia war, when it was still a war of maneuver, when you still had large units attempting to gain ground, the last couple of years, particularly because of drones, it's become a war of attrition, a very small scale war in terms of small units being used, no big arrow movements on a map, so to speak. But what you had is you had American generals commanding the Ukrainian forces in those first couple of years, and they were defeated on the battlefield by the Russians, especially in 2023 with that a Ukrainian offensive that was just absolutely catastrophic. So you've seen the defeat of the American admirals by the Houthis twice in the Red Sea, the defeat of the American generals by the Russians in 2023 in Ukraine. And so then you put all this together, whether it's the paucity, the hollowness of the American military force, the inability of American industry to provide or supply the American military with what it needs to wage war, or the incompetence or failure of American generals and admirals. And you say, why would you sign up? Why would you go forward with a plan for sustained warfare? Why would you think this American military can achieve the political objectives it's been told to carry out, achieve? Why do you think that's possible? Certainly, the United States military can bomb a heck of a lot. And certainly, the United States military can kill a lot of Iranians, bomb a lot of Iranian military targets, destroy a lot of Iranian infrastructure. But can it sustain a campaign to achieve the political objectives it's been detailed or directed to achieve? And, you assemble all this together, you say, how would they possibly do that? That's why I said, as you quoted, not only is this war immoral, a war with Iran would be immoral and illegal, but it would be stupid and unwinnable. So you bomb Iran for how long? To attempt to achieve regime change, or maybe create such sectarian strife, such sectarian uprisings that Iran resembles Syria from a decade ago. I think those are the two goals of the Americans and the Israelis. And if you don't achieve those, how long can you sustain that warfare for? I mean, so this really is a pointless and stupid. But again, it's the politics that drive it, and you know what we're seeing being carried out here, or potentially carried out. You know, has a chance to be every bit as counterproductive and catastrophic as, say, the Iraq and Afghan wars were.
That's just horrific to think about how much destruction can be, you know, wrought on really, like you're saying, the most inefficient system that we can think. And yet, like the amount of deaths that we're going to be looking at if this comes to pass is just absolutely unthinkable.
Right.
It also makes me think about, it's unthinkable, but it makes me think about this concept of burden sharing in both the national security strategy and the national defense strategy, because from what you're saying, let me just like try to process what you've mentioned, because the thing is, a lot of times when the US either demands other countries to raise their military budgets, in the case of, you know, obviously Europe, Japan, etc. And I think this is really what they mean by burden sharing. A lot of that money comes back to the US in terms of like buying US munitions, like Lockheed Martin or whatever. But if they don't have the productive capacity, is just a transfer of wealth. I mean, what can you sort of explain how that?
Well, those type of things just go on Lockheed Martin or Raytheon's or Northrop's order book, right? I mean, so that this is why I would say every time Volodymyr Zelensky came to the United States, and he did do this, he needs to be meeting with the CEOs of American Weapons Company, because they have backlogs, they have back orders of tens of billions of dollars. That if the Ukraine war ends, they're not going to get that money. Right. And the same thing with the American banks that are going to refinance the reconstruction of Ukraine. You know, I mean, for them, you got to keep the same thing, too. You got to keep the spirit of the war going if you want to see that money. Right. You can't let the Americans walk away from this war because you've got tens of billions of dollars on the table here that you can't leave. So, I mean, that is one aspect of this idea of like, get the Europeans to spend 5% of GDP. You know, Andrew Coburn, the journalist, he writes now for Harper's, but Andrew did estimations of how much the European countries were ordering from the American weapons companies following, the 2022 invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And that was in the tens of billions of dollars. Right. So the American weapons companies have seen just a bonanza here in terms of what's being presented to them in terms of possible future earnings. And if anyone wants those weapons any sooner, well, then give us the money to build another production line. Right. I mean, so even like the demand and the fact that they can't meet the demand is a good thing for them because it's a way to request more money. It's similar to, I don't know if you saw the film Ileana, House of Dynamite.
I haven't yet.
It's an instructive film in many ways, but unfortunately, I think the message can get lost, or the message can be manipulated, or maybe because it's Catherine Bigelow and she is tied to the hip with the Pentagon and the CIA, that maybe that was the message all in all. That the way to respond to House of Dynamite is to increase military spending. That if you fire, if you only have 2 interceptor missiles to shoot down the incoming nuclear missile and they both miss, well, then why don't you have 3 or 4 to fire at them, or 5 or 6? It's a question of numbers. And so just give the weapons industry more money and they will provide what we need. And that's, now you see that being planned out in Trump's Golden Dome. Right, his version of Ronald Reagan's Star Wars, which is something that never ever went away, and every president has funded to the tune of billions upon billions of dollars. But the I mean, certainly this idea of burden sharing, though, it's a way of outsourcing. It's a way of reducing costs for the Americans, not just financial costs, not just in the sense of also more profits for the American weapon companies. But it's a way of reducing political costs. It's a way of utilizing proxies. So certainly see with Donald Trump's plan for Gaza through his board of peace. The news this week is the United States is going to build a base for 5,000 soldiers in Gaza. And those aren't going to be American soldiers. Those are meant to be soldiers from third countries. Right now, of course, the Indonesians are the only ones who've offered any soldiers, and they've said they're not going to be there for combat. They're going to be there to do humanitarian work. So we'll see how that actually goes. And they won't be ready until June. But the this idea of burden sharing, extending the political costs, or hiding is a better way to put it, hiding the cost of these wars from the American people. And so that's a great deal of what I see burden sharing as. With Donald Trump and his clique, it takes on another aspect as well. This Donald Trump, his whole life, his whole career has gone on about how the United States is taken advantage of. If you go back to the 1980s, where he really starts to make a name of himself, he talks about how the Japanese are taking advantage of the United States, right? This has been a constant theme, a constant belief of Donald Trump. The United States is being taken advantage of. Like, as you said about Marco Rubio before, about how the United States and the West have been victimized, right? I mean, so this idea of burden share and make them pay their fair share. And it also ties into a particular aspect of the Republican Party, which has been anti-internationalist, right? So since the founding of the United Nations, say, you've had a stream within the American establishment, particularly the last several decades in the Republican Party, that has been anti-United Nations. They feel it infringes upon the sovereignty of the United States. So this idea of burden sharing means offloading these international responsibilities onto others, right? That we're no longer going to take part in the UN, let someone else fund it, let someone else do it. So there's a number of things that tie into it, but again, it ties back, I think, to the Trump Rubio vision for a multipolar dominance by the U.S. And I think a lot of this burden sharing is essentially extortion. It's going to be through these bilateral agreements that Donald Trump wants to achieve with the bulk of the world. It will be a shakedown. It will be a holdup. And so some of that will come from very favorable trade agreements, and some of it will come from political considerations and payoffs, such as sending troops to police Gaza for the United States.
Interesting. And I think to your point that it's to shield the American public from the realities of their foreign policy. I think I lived in the US for 13 years. And during that time, like, one of the biggest refrains was that people don't vote, people don't care, like in the US, about foreign policy. You can't campaign on that. I mean, granted, Donald Trump kind of showed that in a weird way to not be true, because his first term was about being anti-war, and even now some people believe that rhetoric, which I find ridiculous. But
there are people who believe Donald Trump's a good Christian. So what are you gonna do?
Yeah, don't know what to say about that.
Right. I mean, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. That's true. But I think this idea of the fact is, as we've already discussed in this interview, the military-industrial complex, the foreign policy of the U.S., it is so intrinsically linked to everything that happens in the U.S. I mean, we can't separate it at all. Yet, I'm going to quote from your article again.
I think
we should stop to comment, because I'm going to go back to his article again. But yeah, what did you think about that part? Because I think he has some very interesting information.
Yeah, Ileana, I think so far this is a extremely important part of the interview. If not, I haven't seen the whole interview yet, but the most important, because he touched into a point with concrete examples of the inability of the ever-expanding military budget and the military to achieve political goals. He's talking about every single defeat that this super billionaire inflated machine is going on. And he even suggests, why do we have 8 and then we send 6 to hijack Maduro, for instance? Don't remember exactly the numbers. And he's saying, look, there is a level of inefficiency that is patent in this military. We keep putting money in. If you put money in, you're removing money from other places in the budget. Yeah, we have this ever-expanding white elephant that does not achieve the military goals, that has been proven over and over again inefficient, and we are still overstaging this power. And as you say, we're still doing more of the same.
Okay.
And I think this is such a telling story of the contrast between the Chinese mentality and the mentality of the American military. First of all, the Chinese would avoid wars at every price they can avoid. It's part of their intrinsic cultural mentality and experience. They have lived through centuries of war and humiliation. And the Chinese has this very conscious that you don't go for war. You try to avoid, the best war is the war, not the war they were most efficient, but the war that you don't need to go, that you dissuade your enemies to go. And if you have to go, make sure you have everything to win, because will be destruction. So I think this is it. But he's saying something which made me remember I Ching, which is also Chinese philosophy. The I Ching has an hexagram called the army. I don't know if you had the chance to see it. It's called She, the army, hexagram 7. I pull it here. And they say, look their philosophy, how they think the army. An army is a mass that needs organization in order to become a fighting force. Without a strict discipline, nothing can be accomplished. But discipline must not be achieved by force. It requires a strong man who captures the heart of people and awakes their enthusiasm. What do I mean by that? I mean that the essence of the army is that you have a organized leadership, you have a discipline, you have a strategy, you have a structure. The American army is a quilt of money, opportunism, no leadership, and mercenaries. And mercenaries who don't obey hierarchy. It's a bit like Zelensky Nazi team. You know, they go in for a destruction. There is no political goals. There is no nothing. So it's self-defeating. You know, Mark Canada, our friend, made a book about the irregular army, how the army, American army, profit from Nazis. If you see, ISIS was recruiting far right Nazis because they are the most efficient in the destruction. So he was talking, we have the machine destruction that has nothing to do with military. It's just the name. It's a power structure that moves money, re-inaugurates economic cycles, and destroys everything everywhere.
The thing that's kind of shocking about it too is like when he was talking about the 11 fighter jets, I think he was saying that they just have 11. That's what he said. Like he's like 12, but one is out of commission, and then you think about like how small the mechanisms are. But the rhetoric, is so outsized. And why, when Venezuela happened, I mean, when they kidnapped President Maduro, now you can sort of look back and see what the strategy was. Because yes, that was shock and awe. That was shocking to kidnap a head of state, right? This is absolutely shocking. Then when you think about it, it's like they couldn't really do more than that. They pretended, therefore, that Delcy Rodriguez was part of the their like plan and everything like that. And certainly they put a lot of pressure on Delcy Rodriguez so that it's not so easy for her to say no. And I mean, we are seeing the consequences of that in many different ways, the privatization of certain oil sectors, etc. But it's a different way of invasion. like versus what they're saying. Like they're
Yeah.
sort of giving the world the impression they can invade anyone and take over anyone, and but it's not. They really can't. They don't have the infrastructure to actually do that, even though they do have like over 700 to 900 military bases. Yes.
Yeah, a military that only displays force and only achieves destruction is actually not really a military. It's something else. And I think he's talking about this degeneration from within, which is extremely interesting, Ileana, because we attribute to the US their imperial power through those 900 bases they have, and then the whole covered companies and mercenaries that are part of this structure. But he's pointing out huge deficiencies in the structure. He's not underestimating at any point the level of destruction this can cause. Actually, he's saying it's aggravating. It's even worse in terms of destruction. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's, I think we should cut to the separate part.
I will be releasing it all in clips because it's really, I think, useful information. And also the link below to his article, I've also put in the chat box. But should we continue?
Yeah.
Cool. Population of the United States, except veterans and their families, has largely avoided the harsh and cruel realities of the wars it wages overseas. I mean, obviously, this is on purpose. And I think we've had this conversation a little bit about whether or not at this point the manufacturing of consent for a war is even necessary in the U.S. Because can Donald Trump just act unilaterally without the say-so of the American people? But I still do believe that the U.S. people, the U.S. citizens, out of all the citizens in the world, are best positioned to stop their government from these types of actions, right? They should be more empowered, actually, not less. Like, we should be focusing on the fact that the U.S. public can be empowered to change for their country, because they're the only ones that really can. So to bring it back to your article again, you state in that article that war with Iran could mark a shift, which would very possibly bring the war home to the US. Can you sort of expand on that? You seem to suggest in this conversation already that the US is very serious about having a war with Iran. So what would that mean?
So, there have been political costs for American wars, this century. You certainly look at the 2006 midterm elections for Congress, the 2008 both the primary and general elections, where Barack Obama, the anti-war candidate, the anti-Iraq candidate, beats Hillary Clinton. Then he beats the war hero, John McCain. I mean, both the 2006 and 2008 elections were clearly referendums about the war in Iraq. In 2016 as well, there's a lot of good evidence, some studies and research done by, I think it was both Harvard and University of Minnesota, that showed that Donald Trump wins that election based upon counties that he wins in swing states in what we call the Rust Belt, the middle part of the United States, because of counties that had disproportionately high share of casualties in the Iraq and Afghan wars, and that people still connected Hillary Clinton in 2016 with those wars, which they should have done. And so the American political establishment now understands that there is a political cost for these wars if the American people perceive a cost, if they feel the war themselves, right? If they see on their television screens every night another face of a young man or young woman killed in these wars that long since made any sense to them, right? These are wars that they were lied about, and the American people understand they're built on lies, and now they're seeing the face of another young man, and in particular, say they are young men or women from your communities or your county or your state. So the American government, particularly the Barack Obama administration, really understands this. And so that's what you see, in particular, the second half of Obama's administration, a shift in American military policy to outsourcing wars, to making the wars hidden, and so the way you do that is you use proxy forces. So again, we're not going to put any Americans into Gaza. We're going to put Indonesians into Gaza, right? I mean, we're going to put Pakistanis into Gaza, whoever we can get, and again, only one country has kind of signed up for it, so they might not get anybody. But we're not going to use Americans there because the cost would be too great. You're going to use contractors. All right, you're going to use mercenaries. You're going to use CIA or special operations forces or drones, things that are covert and that are classified, that can't legally be allowed to speak about. So that's one of the ways that you're going to do is you're going to hide the wars and hide the cost. And as long as the American people aren't feeling a cost, they're not going to vote on it. So what you can have happen then is you can have wars that are unpopular, that don't bring up political cost. And so I think you'll see this with Iran. If the United States is able to carry out a war as it wants against Iran, where it's just simply the United States bombing and droning and sending missiles against Iran as it pleases with no consequence to American forces, the American public may, by and large, as it is now, because war with Iran only has about a 20 or 25% approval rating in the United States right now, they'll be able to carry it out because the American people won't be feeling the cost. You can have a lot of things that people have opinions on. It doesn't mean that they're going to vote on them, right? So the war in Iran can be incredibly unpopular, but come November at the polls, a war where the United States has not had anyone killed, where you don't know of anyone who's over there, where there's no cost to you, you're not personally feeling the war. Are you going to vote on that? Or are you going to vote on the fact that, you have to, you're living paycheck to paycheck. The economy seems worse. You've got ICE and Border Patrol in your state assaulting and humiliating and beating people, right? I mean, so what are you going to vote on? What do so that is I think the rubric or the way in which American White Houses view warfare now. But the reality is, to the point you were alluding to, Ileana, the idea that the American people may feel this in the sense that certainly the idea of short-term an economic shock. Iran demonstrated the other day a closure of the Straits of Hormuz. The Straits of Hormuz, about a third of the world's seaborne oil and gas goes through the Straits of Hormuz every day. You close it off, you're going to have a catastrophic shock economically to the world and the United States and its people, where more than 60% are living paycheck to paycheck now, are going to feel that, right? They're going to feel that across the board. But longer term, economically, you have a continued flight away from the American economic system, right? So spoke earlier about an American economy, a consumer economy that's based upon a strong dollar policy, the world's reserve currency, the fact that we can pay to import everything. Well, what happens when nations stop investing in the United States by buying its debt? What happens when you have that flight away from American treasuries and American dollars, and you have a devaluing of the American currency, and now all of a sudden a nation of importers is facing 8, 10, 15% inflation because of the devaluing of the dollar, and then long-term those issues as well as then you already have the makings of a fascist police state here in the United States, the clear intention spelled out by those in the administration to do so. These are modern day black shirts with badges, essentially, that are in our communities, and they're going to build that out. They're going to strengthen it. Well, what better gift to them would be to have a war against, a nation like Iran. Iran is a country that has been in the American conscience almost my entire life. I was 6 years old when the hostage crisis occurred. This is, if you go, Ileana, through the last several decades, and you were to do polling, and I think we could easily look this up, but I think it would come out this way. who is the biggest threat to the United States worldwide? You'd have a bunch of different nations popping in the top three, Iraq, Libya, the Soviet Union, China, Venezuela, Nicaragua, North Korea, right? There'd be a bunch of different countries that would kind of come in and out. I would bet that Iran makes it into the top three consistently, over the last 4 decades. And so that idea or understanding of Iran as an adversary, as the country that is run by Muslim clerics who took our people hostage, that is the conventional understanding of Iran by the American public. So, to reinforce that then, I shouldn't say it that way. That makes it sound like everyone's walking around again, because most Americans are not in favor of this war and think it's a terrible idea. But that is kind of like the lingering thing in people's subconscious. And that is certainly what the American media and the American entertainment complex put out, right? And we could just go through a host of different television shows and movies that embrace this idea of the dangerous Iranians. So how, for a gift for those in power as they push their black shirts out into our communities, would be this threat from Iran to bolster the reasons why we need to have a greater federal police force on our streets, but also too, why we need to increase our surveillance, why we need to continue to diminish civil liberties. So the idea of seeing a Patriot Act 2 come about with the war in Iran, particularly in the sense that America is vulnerable to attack from individual actors or small groups, whether that be sabotage, just people going around and shooting up electrical power stations and bringing our grid down for days or weeks at a time, which is a possibility, or what you saw throughout the global war on terror, which were attacks against Americans by individuals who align themselves with Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, but who importantly, every time they carried out those attacks, were saying, I'm doing this because I'm bringing in the war to the Americans. You're killing people of my faith. You're killing my countrymen. You're dropping bombs on my people. You need to feel that pain as well. That's essentially what those who carried out terror attacks in the U.S. over the last 25 years have been saying. So when you had the Pulse nightclub massacre, whether it was the man who drove that truck into the crowd in New Orleans on New Year's Eve last year, killed 12 or 14 people, the attempted Times Square bombing, go back 15 years ago, and a multitude of others, that is the line. So certainly you could see how such attacks would carry out again. Now, the American establishment, both the political and media establishment, will say those attacks aren't about the war in Iran. This is not about the fact that the United States just killed a whole bunch of Iranian civilians, which we will do in droves. This is, so if similar, these men carrying out these attacks, pointing to atrocities carried out by the United States in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, etc. It was the same thing. That will not be pronounced by the American political or media establishment, but those attacks will be there. And now with the ability of social media in particular for people to understand things and to get a viewpoint or get information not filtered through the American media, well, that could change things then, right? I mean, so you have this possibility then of this blowback on the American public, whether it be economic, whether it be in the case of strengthening a neo-fascist government, whether it be the diminishment of civil liberties, or whether it be actual attacks on American people and infrastructure. So there could be a cost to the American people here from this I think those in Washington, D.C. Are willfully not paying attention to. And some of them want it because, again, it strengthens their position for greater control, greater power.
I mean, I imagine they're going to double down on this idea of we have to defend our freedom. And they're doing this because they hate our freedom.
Right. That's what's always right. Yeah. I mean, that's, when you have the 9/11 attacks and the hijackers clearly in their videos, this used to be available on YouTube. It's no longer available there. But the hijackers, are clear. This is our reasons for carrying out these attacks are because of the U.S. is bombing Iraq, every other day or every third day, plus the deadly sanctions on the Iraqi people from the Americans because of the U.S. support for Israel. Muhammad Atta, the leader of the hijackers, he was very much influenced by Israel's massacres in southern Lebanon. And then the third one, the one that, is the one I think that most people associate with Osama bin Laden, this idea that the United States has troops in Saudi Arabia, right? It's desecrating the holy places. Those, you don't have to agree with those, right? You don't have to say, okay, they were correct about that. But I think if you're reasonable and objective and fair, you'll say, okay, those are actual arguments or legitimate grievances that they had. And so that gets filtered, of course. That doesn't get exposed. There was a thing, I don't know if you remember, about 2 years ago on TikTok, Osama bin Laden's message about 9/11 went viral, and you had generation of young Americans who had never heard this before. The United States was over there bombing the Middle East before they attacked us on 9/11. Oh, there was a cause and effect here. Holy cow, really? Why? They've been lying to me about this all this time, or at least not lying and not telling us this, and you had that. It became dramatic. And that was one of the first things that led to the calls for the banning of TikTok and then the forced selling of TikTok. So, and of course, George W. Bush's response when he was asked, why do they attack us? He said, because they hate us for our freedoms. And that was just taken as the only narrative that was permissible in the American, political and media establishment.
Oh boy. Yeah, it's like a history repeating itself. But Matt, how are you feeling about ending on a positive note? Is there one? Because I think maybe the positive note is that there is an awakening because of social media, like you're saying. Do you feel that at all?
Well, no, I'm most optimistic about this technology we have, about the social media, about the ability of people to inform one another, report, coordinate, educate, organize, mobilize through these platforms. We have in our communities throughout the United States right now, we have people who are organizing to confront and defeat ICE and Border Patrol when they come to their communities. And that's something that's done through our phones, right? We could have done it before, but this makes it a lot easier. Right. This makes it a lot more effective and a lot more efficient. And then let alone the spreading of information. Again, the TikTok example is a great example. And the selling of TikTok to me proves the point. They're afraid. The establishment, the elite, the powers that be, the ruling class, however you want to describe them, is afraid of information. They're afraid of knowledge. They're afraid of the ability of people to speak to one another and convey a truth that the powers that be don't want conveyed. Dramatically seen with the genocide in Gaza, and the ability of that information to, particularly over the long term, to infiltrate all sorts of spaces. So you see that, I think a lot of people are familiar with this, or not familiar. We live in them. We live in our own little bubbles, right? On social media, we see what we want to see. But when you have, say, something like the genocide in Gaza, that is so enormous, it has gotten into spaces where that information wouldn't have been available for. So you see spaces where, say, young Republicans who previously were fervently pro-Israel have now turned anti-Israel. Now a majority of young Republicans are against the United States supporting Israel with military aid. You see someone like the late Charlie Kirk, who was fervently pro. It was in that camp. Everything in his bubble would have said to have been pro-Israel. And you see in the last months of before his murder, a change in his understanding of what's going on, because he could not ignore the information that was being presented to him. And so I think the ubiquitousness of it, the prevalence, the dominance of information in this way. But now we are up against the challenge of AI, where everything that we know will be filtered through AI. AI, there will be however many AI systems out there that the vast majority of the public will utilize, the handful maybe, all controlled by massive multinational corporations run by billionaires. And they will be the people who decide what the artificial intelligence platforms tell people is the truth. I mean, this is incredibly dangerous. And so just as we have this breakthrough being able to do this and share information, as I was saying, we now are in this next phase where we are up against those who are going to be able to control what the truth is. We've seen this to a degree in reporting on the drop in visits to news websites, the drop in visits to websites in general, because now if you go on Google or whatever search platform, it gives you an AI summary before you even get to the search results. So why, it's going to tell me whatever the question is I'm asking them. So why do I need to go to the site to actually confirm that's what it says? And if people are
wrong.
Exactly. Oh, I do this research. I use it quite a bit for research because it can be very helpful, but it's incredibly problematic and it's very dangerous. I was doing research on the Iraq War, and what it was telling me was just incorrect. And basically, I was asking AI about. I was trying to find a book. I was trying to get the ChatGPT to get me a source for something I know I read years ago. And in the course of the conversation with it about the Iraq War, this is essentially the resistance in Iraq. ChatGPT was telling me that the resistance in Iraq was not about American occupation. It was about people needing jobs, right? It was about criminal elements, right? And it was about jihadists. And we know that 97, 98% of the Iraqi resistance were Iraqis, not foreign fighters. So, when I would push back on it and say, what are you talking about? And I said, what are your sources? And the sources it provided to me were like General David Petraeus's biography, the official history of the United States Army. And I say, this stuff is not true. This is actually what I like about AI, because you can have a conversation with it to a degree, right? This stuff is not true. Why are you telling me this? And the ChatGPT told me the reason why it cites David Petraeus, say, as opposed to accurate information, is because it's programmed to its programming it makes it defer to institutional structures versus historical accuracy.
Wow, it just says it out loud.
It out there, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the thing, is once we get more savvy with using it, then hopefully people are just not going to believe the first result that they see.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. And it's so easy to corrupt it too. I don't know if you're going to cut this out or whatnot, but I just I want to, run my Ethernet cable, right? Because my Wi-Fi is not always. And so I just asked, how do you do that? What should I, and then it gives me links to stores or links to products. And it's right. I mean, this is the Google one, and it gives me links to products. So, it also too has a capacity to really dominate commerce. We think Amazon is bad, right? Where Amazon dominates so much now, and like the top thing that's displayed on Amazon is what 80% of people buy or whatever that is, right? And so it really decides the market, or not the market, it really decides who's successful commercially. And I think AI is going to take that one step further, because it's telling me to buy, you get those little clips to put in your floor to hold the wire down. It's telling me to buy these clips, right? Meanwhile, how many other manufacturers of clips are out there, and why is it telling me to buy these clips? But that's the easy thing for me to do. Yeah, it's probably going to be good enough. They might not be the best clips, but they're probably good enough. Let's buy those.
Yeah.
Save me time. So I think there is a real danger with it in terms of the just greater control by these corporations, not just of what we know, but over who succeeds.
Well, I think that leads us back to the original premise of this show, which is to say the problem with almost everything is capitalism and imperialism, because that's the problem with AI. Like, if we didn't have the capitalist system while utilizing AI, we wouldn't have these problems. It's like, that is the thing with almost everything that we have.
And it's that right. So it doesn't matter to Google whether or not which clip I actually buy, which manufacturer prospers for my need to put Ethernet through my house, right? It matters to them that I click on Google, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their needs and their profit seeking dominate and corrupt the other industries. Yeah. So I think it's quite unique in that way. And I think that's, you can make the analogy to empire as well then.
Yes, exactly. It's self-defeating often, but it can get away with it. Just like just to go back to the Google thing, I read that basically Google gives you bad search results, so you have to keep using the search bar. And this is also why people now use ChatGPT or whatever, like they're
Right.
it's a self-defeating thing because they're so greedy that it's actually making people move away from like the Google search bar as well.
Right.
Because that's how they make more money. So it is like this very bizarre thing of imperialism where it's like, that's why it's not sustainable. It just gets the diminishing returns, but that doesn't matter because they only have one trajectory.
Well, and this is the idea of extraction and rent seeking, right? And financialization is, as long as those at the top are seeing the results, as long as they're getting their cut, it doesn't matter to them. And oftentimes there's such a short-term mindset that we're going to take as much as we can for now, even though it's going to hurt us in the long term. We're going to suck up everything that we can now, and it's not going to be sustainable. But, the next CEO will worry about that kind of thing. But for me, for my shareholders, this is going to look great, right? I think that's the mentality that we're dealing here. That is an imperial mentality.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's not the most positive note to end on.
No, we didn't. No.
Why we're anti-imperialist, right? So we got back.
Right.
But thank you again, Matthew, for coming on to Empire Watch. I never remembered to unmute myself. I have to say, watching myself is quite horrific. But yes, Sara, any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, the positive note is AI is dominating the world, is creating a stupidity class. I have the most savagest conversation with ChatGPT, so I put it aside because it is really so programmed to a language. It's not programmed to knowledge. It's programmed to a worldview that everyone should adopt. That's already the first problem. But I was very interesting what he said about the Iran war and about the war. The American society is so egocentric and self-centric that war needs to come home in order for them to understand how horrific it is, as if there was no solidarity. I think this is one of the psychological elements of a society, which is exploratorial, which is based on soul competition, where people relate with each other on a competitive basis rather than solidarity basis. And it's part of it, everyone, it's you don't look at people with empathy so they reinforces this psychological elements in their society, and they can only see the horrors of war if body bags arrive and damaged souls come back home. And you were saying something very interesting. Clinton's legacy, we tend to say they are incompetent in many levels. But beyond incompetence, they also leave a legacy. I'll give an example. People tend to interpret Lula's success based on his rhetoric, even in the left. What he preaches. No, Lula leaves a legacy, and you don't delete those legacies in the letterboard. And he was saying Hillary Clinton's legacy, body bags, and broken souls is there. It's not something you can erase with political rhetoric or propaganda. It will stay. And as soon as someone comes and is against it, they probably will win these people electorally. And I thought it was very interesting. He was saying Iran, and I was like, wow, Iran could bring back, it's so far away, but it could bring back war to home.
I think the thing. the thing that he sort of elucidated with that question, and I think it's a little bit not depressing, not very hopeful, I think, but the fact is he's saying that, you know, a majority of Americans are actually against the war in Iran, but they might not vote according to that anyway, because unless it directly affects them on their daily life, they might still vote with whatever, you know, and I think that is the struggle, really. And also the difficulty with having a duopoly is the other thing, because like Trump is such a, like, you know, people associate ICE with Trump and the fascistic tactics with Trump. So you're like, I'll do anything to get him out of office, perhaps, you know, and then vote sort of, you might still vote for a warmonger just to get him out of office, you know, and that doesn't really solve the overall problem.
Yeah, he's talking about the American psyche, you know, this conventional understanding, and I'd say almost universal, not universal, but very large understanding that Iran is an enemy. For decades, he'll say, if we have to attribute Iran a role, it will be the role of an enemy, and we create Iran, you know, and there's a racism there, you know, Muslims, the theocracy or whatever, and well, yeah, that's what exactly you touched the point. The American will vote what they are immediately affected by. There is no world beyond their own home, apparently, you know. And he was saying something. There is even a denial that there is an empire. And we're talking about institutions, people who operate the empire. We're not talking about jobs. We're not talking about Alejandro Ocasio-Cortez. You know, we're not talking about a waitress. You know, we're talking about people operating institutions, denying the existence, the very existence of an empire structure. Same in Britain. And, you know, this inability to see beyond their own personal needs, it is astonishing. It's lack of education. A country that doesn't invest in education will have this type of mentality. You know, I love to watch when I don't understand a thematic at all, I go to the Americans because they're so didactic in breaking down to the level of dummy, you know, because they need to talk to dummies all the time. So they have developed this amazing ability to be extremely didactic. Like if you go the Germans, they will be extremely theoretical about something and detailed and extremely sophisticated. But the average American demands this simplicity in the bad way. Very interesting. In the end of the day, is what is right here that will, you know, that will define future of humanity in a way. You know, Ileana, when you study law, you're made to believe that human rights needs to be universal, democracy needs to be universal. It's part of the curriculum that you become.
And they give a certain idea of democracy that I think is very biased. Like it doesn't really, first of all, it doesn't really go into the core of what democracy is supposed to be for, but it's just like a concept that's an ideal, but it's not really, they don't go into like, why should people have democracy, you know?
Yeah. I mean, they go from the assumption that we have a democracy that is working well. Yeah. This is the first axiomatic belief that you have. And this is also in law school. And I remember one of my most intelligent friends in Germany, he said, well, I wrote a book against human rights, and I don't think they're totally wrong. And I was scared. But what he was saying is to create universality on those values and to impose is extremely ignorant. And it is a tool of domination. Each society had its own organization. Afghanistan had tribes. They didn't even have the concept of private property. So what the fuck we are going to enshrine property rights into here? You know, we need to understand that the beauty of this world is the diversity of perspectives and ways of in different realities, and we go in the name of this fucking thing they call human rights and democracy preaching. It's just the same as a crusade, as a religious crusade in form of law.
Yeah,
You know?
and especially since there's no basis for it really in our own countries. Like we have just no power seeming. Well, I'm trying to be like empowering. We do have power, but it feels like we don't have power to change our systems and our governments. But ultimately, I mean, I do think of like the Chinese Revolution, and really that was a horrible time. Like, I mean, they were in much worse conditions. So hopefully that will help us.
Yeah, I think it's one of the purpose of the channel, correct me if I'm wrong, is to say to people, look, there is an empire, that's one point, but there is another way of living, and a more hopeful and a more solidar. Let's look around the world and see what other people are doing. That's why we're bringing also the Global South Rise. Let's see how other countries is envisaging their own future, their happiness, or in within this context. Yeah, I'm very hopeful. I think that, you know, when you don't have a consciousness, there's really no other way around. But the sole fact that you're conscious of some things is already opening up a window of choice.
I think so. And I do think it is hopeful to look at the Global South and the initiatives that are happening there to be like, absolutely, there's hope, there's progress to be, made. I mean, it can actually, we covered the green energy situation in China. That's like a tangible thing that is changing for the people there. That's not just an abstraction or an ideal. It is actually happening as we speak, and I've been witness to it, and people there have actually been witness to it, to how things can improve, and things totally can improve here too. So that, I think that's part of the channel. You're right, it's not just anti-imperialist, it's also what is the multilateral world going to look like, and how is it already being built.
Yeah. Well, you're very, very optimistic about the UK. I'm happy you are. We could change it here.
Well,
Did you want to do it? I love the fact that China is leading on environment, because this was the mantra that was repeated over and over again. It's not possible economical growth aligned with environmental respect. Let's exploit freely people and nature as we please, and everything is a hoax. I love that. I think it's just such a beautiful counterexample, smashing this beliefs, this godlike beliefs that they made us align with.
Yeah. Exactly. But we're awake, so that's good.
Yeah. Well, interview. I hope people enjoyed it too.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so too. And also, I realized I didn't even introduce Matthew properly. But the description is in the down below. His Substack is really great. He is a disabled Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War and former Afghan War State Department officer. In 2009, after being appointed to the Foreign Service, he resigned his post in Afghanistan over the Obama administration's escalation of the Afghan War. He is now an analyst and a commentator on foreign and military policies issues as a senior fellow with the Eisenhower Media Network. But he's so knowledgeable with that, and like you're saying, it's somewhat worrying that there's such intelligent people in the military, but he resigned. So
sometimes I think the military is more sane than the Pentagon seems to be more sane than the government. And
yeah, the thing of it that was really interesting about this particular interview with him was that in my initial interview with him on Global Majority for Peace, which the link is down below, he actually talked about how when he was serving, there was a set of books that they actually had to read. There was a suggestion of the military at that time were supposed to understand how the enemy thinks and understand at least different war strategies and theories. And he's saying that's no longer the case. They don't want the military to be thinking anymore. And so to his, he actually mentioned in this interview how it's basically the dregs are left in the military, the generals that did not protest the Afghanistan war, the Iraq war, knowing it full well it was illegal and pointless. They still stayed on, and they're still staying on no matter the cost, no matter the rationality behind it. So I do think we're seeing a complete difference. I mean, obviously it was still imperialist then, but I'm just saying there is a difference in terms of quality. I mean, and I think to Matt Kennard's book as well, where he talks about irregular army, there's sort of like a lowering of standards that's coinciding with the decline.
Yeah, and I think this is our longest
Oh
show.
my God.
3.5 hours. Thanks for bearing with us, everyone.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, guys, for chatting in the chat box. And thank you, Sara.
We're going to become like big brothers, 24/7.
Oh my God. Right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. We will be back next week. And we're really excited about some changes that we're going to be bringing on. And, it's lovely to talk to you as always, Sara.
Lovely. See you.
Bye, everyone.